Okay, thank you very much. Right, welcome to this Dorset Police and Crime Panel meeting. My name's Mike Short and I'll be chairing this panel today. If I could welcome three new members. That's Peter Barrow, Councillor Peter Barrow, Councillor Lisa Northover and Councillor May Haynes. We've done one of these before, as you well know, but it was an informal meeting. We do get more or less the same outcome, but it can be a bit clunky at times. Therefore, I'd ask for patience from all participants. And also, before we start, just to remind the panel members and also the public that the role of this panel is to support and scrutinise the Dorset Police and Crime Commissioner. We do not get involved in scrutinising operational policing. That is the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner. So I'm now going to hand over to our lead government officer in order for him to conduct introductions and apologies received. Mark?
Thanks very much, Chair. So I'm Mark Eyre. I'm the Service Manager for Assurance for Dorset Council, who's the host authority for the panel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run through, first of all, the members of the panel. What I'll do then is move on to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and then any officers that are in attendance today. So what I will do is as I run through everybody, I'll just give an opportunity after each name for that person just to confirm who they are and before moving on to the next one. So if I start with the panel itself, Councillor Barrow.
Good morning, I'm Pete Barrow from Dorset Council, represent Radipole Ward. Glad to be here and looking forward to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dove.
Good morning, Councillor Bobby Dove for BCP Council and also Vice Chair of this panel.
Thank you. Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you very much. Councillor George Farquhar, BCP Council and a member of the panel.
Thank you. Councillor Fry.
Good morning, Councillor S. Fry, Dorchester West.
Councillor Haynes.
Thank you. Councillor May Haynes, BCP Council, and I'm replacing Councillor Mohan Iyengar.
Thank you. Ian McVie.
Morning, Ian McVie, independent member. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Northover.
Hi, I'm Councillor Northover. I represent Muscliffe and Stratton Park in the BCP Council area.
Thank you. Councillor Pipe.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Bill Pipe. I represent the Litchett San Upton and a member of the panel.
Thank you very much. Councillor Taylor.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Jamie Taylor from Dorset Council and I represent Chalmers St Mary rep round Dorchester and I'm Crown Panel as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we have Councillor Trent today as well.
Yeah, Councillor Tony Trent, BCP Councillor representing Alderney and Bourne Valley, and I'm a substitute for Councillor Rachel Maidment.
Thank you very much. Before I move on, just to check that I haven't missed any members of the panel. Okay, thank you very much. So if I move on to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, Martin Underhill.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to this virtual meeting, and if you're a member of the public, I look forward to hearing your views of what you think.
Thank you very much. Simon Bullock.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Simon Bullock. I'm the Chief Executive to the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you. Adam Harold.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Adam Harold. I'm the Director of Operations for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you. And Julie Strange.
Good morning, I'm Julie Strange. I'm the Chief Finance Officer for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you very much. And I think that's everyone from the OPCC. Have I missed anybody? Okay, thank you. And so just briefly to introduce officers. So it's myself, Mark Eyre, Service Manager for Assurance. Elaine, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. I'm Elaine Tibble and I'm a Senior Democratic Services Officer.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're also joined by a couple of apprentices working within the Democratic Services team, which is Megan Rochester and George Dare. And I think that's the full roll call, Mike.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for your help. Moving on to item 2 for the minutes, confirm that you've all had a chance to read the minutes, and I'll take by exception any points raised that you wish to mention now.
Chair, may I just raise 2 points, please? For February meeting, point 52, there was no proposer or seconder included for the vice chair. And point 55, I note that there hasn't been no seminars arranged for that area. And could we ask for it to be added to the forward work plan, please?
Yep, thank you. Mark, can you take on that, please?
Thank you, will do.
Yeah. Any other points? Thank you. I'll also refer to the fact that we had an informal meeting using the same system as we've got here, more or less the same style of meeting, and the informal minutes for that meeting in June, and a full video footage, about 3 hours off the top of my head, is also on the Police and Crime Panel website. Moving on to...
Sorry, Chair, just before we move on, could I just ask for, when we look at the minutes before they get signed off, if we're going that formally, we talked about police staff on page 43. I noticed that the staff is coming up on our forward work plan. I think the question was asked by Councillor Fry, investigations onto long-term impact of staff mental health under COVID. I wondered if we could add that to the paper that's coming forward, please.
So that's at the next meeting we'll be looking, or we will be revisiting police welfare and the work that the Police and Crime Commissioner has done towards that, and you want that particular item added as part of their paperwork. Is that correct?
Yes, it was raised by Councillor Fry. We hadn't got the answer yet, and I wondered if it was appropriate to add it to the next agenda's piece of work.
Thank you. Can you take note of that, please, Mark?
Thanks, Chair. Will do.
All right. Moving on to item 3. I personally have an interest in item 5 of this meeting. Does anybody else have any declarations of interest?
I will as well, Mike. Ian McVie, independent, same reasons.
Okay, thank you very much. Mark, can you just confirm we've had no public participation, public speaking questions or anything?
I can confirm that, Mike. No questions and no petitions received.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. So moving on to item 5. Mark, can I ask that you place myself and Ian McVie into the lobby, please?
Thanks, Chair. We'll do that now. Can I just pause for a second and just confirm that neither Mike Short or Ian McVie are in the meeting now? Thank you very much. Okay, on this stage, as the chair has left the meeting, it will now be Councillor Dove as the vice chair that will lead us on this item. And if you're happy with that, Chair, I will introduce it.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'll very briefly summarise the report. The police and crime panels nationally are required to have 2 independent members. A panel of councillors appointed Mike Short and Ian McVie when the Dorset Police and Crime Panel was first established back in November 2012. At that point, the panel also unanimously chose to retain their services, and they were reappointed in February 2016. The panel now need to decide whether to extend their services for a further 4 years or whether to go back out to interview. Both Mike Short and Ian McVie have both expressed an interest in continuing to serve as independent members, but the panel have 2 options really. Firstly, to extend their term of office, or secondly, to carry out a selection process. And at that stage, the current co-opted members would be eligible to reapply if they felt that they wished to do so. Hopefully I've explained the process satisfactorily within the report, but I'm now going to pass back to the chair to prompt any points that people want to make and facilitate the voting on the options. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mark. As you heard, this is something that we're required to do as per our constitution. Before we go into the vote, does anyone have any questions around this area that they may wish to ask at this point, please? I see that I have 2 RTSs from Councillor Fry and Pipe. Is that regarding the vote or is that for questions?
That is regarding the vote, Chair.
Can I just ask if anyone's got any questions, please?
Mine is also concerning the vote.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Councillor Pipe. In that case, does anyone have any points that they would like to discuss before we move on to the vote? Okay, thank you. Councillor Fry.
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of continuity with the current health situation we have ongoing, the changes in the PCC panel and also the change in PCC next year possibly, I would like to propose that the panel extend the term of the current co-opted members and ask for formal confirmation that those members are willing to continue to serve for a further term on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pipe.
Thank you, Chairman. I would wholly endorse what Councillor Fry has just said, and I would gladly second that recommendation or proposal.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add at this point or go straight to the vote, please? I haven't had any requests to speak. In that case, it might just be easier. Does anyone want to vote against the proposal that we've had? Do we have any abstentions? In that case, are we entirely satisfied that all 10 panel members here today are supporting the proposal put forward by Councillor Fry?
Absolutely.
That would be for a term, Chairman, of 4 more years. I don't think it's been mentioned, but 4 years is the period to which they will now serve if they're reappointed. Sorry.
I confirm that's the case, Councillor Pipe.
Thank you, Mark. I think that's the discussion over, and we have our proposal, and it's been agreed by the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll invite both Mike Short and Ian McVie back into the meeting. This may just take a few moments. Can I just ask whether Mike Short and Ian McVie are back in?
I am. Ian McVie.
I am. Yeah. Shock horror probe. Technology works.
Excellent. I think in that case, the chair reverts back to yourself.
Oh no, sorry. Thank you, Ian and Mike. The panel would like to know if you are both willing to continue to serve for a further term on the panel, please.
I am.
I am.
Thank you. I think that's item 5 concluded.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Vice Chair and Mark, for doing all the technological bits to make it happen. Appreciate that. Right, moving on to item 6, COVID-19 verbal update, and this really builds on the written paper that was presented to the informal panel that was held in June. So I'm going to hand over to the PCC, Mr. Martin Underhill, in order for him to provide a verbal update on the way that he and his team have been handling COVID-19 in conjunction with Dorset Police. Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So before I go into the COVID update, I'll just take this opportunity, if I may, to update you on a few developments that have occurred in the last few weeks, because they're all quite significant. The first is, you may have seen, we have a new Deputy Chief Constable joining us in a couple of weeks' time. That person is Scott Chilton, who's an ACC from Hampshire Police, who joins the force in October when DCC David Lewis retires. So to deal with Scott, he is the ACC across investigations, custody and the wider criminal justice system, and deals with intelligence. And he brings a great deal of experience from his extensive policing career. And I look forward to welcoming him to Dorset. And interestingly, he has already taken on the mantle of stop and search, which we will talk about later. And I'm sure the panel will join me in recording our gratitude for the work taken by DCC Dave Lewis. He's provided extraordinary leadership and service, not just to the people of Dorset, but also through regional and national roles that he's held. And of course, we wish him the best in his retirement. The second thing I'd like to highlight, because it's very relevant to this panel, is the National PCC Review. You will have seen my response to that, and I'm aware that your panel has responded as well. I would just highlight that part one of the review focuses on the role to date, with a particular emphasis on fire governance and the interaction between PTCs and directly elected city mayors, which recognises, I think, the government's drive for local devolution. And we know there's a part two to that review, which has not yet been announced, but will come after the next set of elections, which possibly are May next year. We will have to wait and see. And finally, as updates, you will probably see in the news that forces nationally are on their way to recruiting 6,000 new officers, and that is the case in Dorset too. We set a target of 50, and they have now joined us. And we've actually welcomed 2 transferee courses since I last spoke to you as well. So recruitment and transferees are going well. Forces in England and Wales are anticipating an announcement that will confirm the local targets and funding for the second year of the Uplift programme. And once that announcement is made, I'm sure I'll make sure that you're updated. But as it stands, and we must be aware of this, we do not yet know what that looks like. I'm hoping that the Prime Minister's promise for 20,000 new recruits is honoured, but I'm conscious that the pandemic may alter those plans. So, talking about the pandemic, let's give you an overview of activity. My last update to you was very wide-ranging and included, if you remember, telling you about us dip checking the tickets issued by Dorset Police. But I also informed you by early April, the initial government's response had been superseded by extraordinary gold structures, which were well embedded and operating effectively. The force and OPC has returned to a business as usual state, with OPCC providing oversight and scrutiny of the forces response through not only the usual strategic force boards, but also the new gold structure, all of which continue virtually in most instances. I would say 95% of my meetings now are virtual, and likewise for my team. To be clear, this return to business as usual means that for the last few months, the force of my office have been very much able to concentrate on the continuation of the police and crime priorities. And this is something that I look forward to detailing as part of our quarterly reporting under the next item in this meeting. Last time out, you remember that I was able to update you on specific examples of extraordinary commissioning, public consultation, scrutiny. And my team was and still is heavily embedded in continuing the work to look after the health and well-being of officers through these unusual and taxing times. There have been several changes to local governance arrangements in place to oversee the pandemic since we last met. The weekly SCGs were stepped back in late July and now meet every 3 weeks to retain oversight of restart, which is the discrete short-term process of restarting services, recovery, which is long-term process of rebuilding, restoring and rehabilitating following the emergency, and reset, which is an opportunity provided by the disruption to embed new ways of working, i.e. home working, or practices that have proved that they are very beneficial. However, in response to the UK COVID-19 alert level increasing from 3 to 4, the STG has returned to meeting weekly as of yesterday. So its first meeting as a weekly structure started again yesterday morning, as did my briefing of MPs and leaders last night. As members will be aware, a new COVID Protection Board, chaired by the Dorset Director of Public Health, Sam Crowe, is responsible for monitoring and responding to any potential coronavirus outbreaks. The DPH is responsible for managing local outbreak management plans for both of our council areas, which sets out how local agencies will identify, respond to and contain local outbreaks. For my part, I'm reassured the force is well prepared for the difficulties that may arise again this winter and has robust plans in place to deal with the inevitable challenges that will come. Bear with me. Of course, there remains so much that's impossible to predict about the months and years ahead. Only last week, the policing minister confirmed that lost income will be covered by the government, which means the impact of the MTFS could be minimal. But as I've alluded to already, big factors are at play here. What does the pandemic mean for the public sector funding in the future? It's too early to say. We are hearing in the last 2 days from politicians that the autumn budget has been put back. And we're also hearing from politicians this morning on Radio 4 that the CSR may be delayed. So it is very uncertain times, and it's a fast-moving situation with a host of new measures announced only days ago. And with it came an expectation from ministers that police would increase enforcement, along with, as yet to be confirmed, promises of additional short-term funding. There has been talk of £60 million being given to policing, but that hasn't been confirmed, and we're not sure what that funding would do. What we do know, however, is that most robust and agile arrangements are in place in Dorset, and the public support the partnership approach that we've taken so far. We also know that our local data does not yet suggest some of the national concerns are being seen here locally, which does confirm our view right from the start of this that we should be responding locally to this pandemic rather than nationally. We're not complacent, but cognizant that government messaging can be confusing, and national policy is all too often focused on metropolitan areas and not more rural places like Dorset. One of the key things we've learned during this crisis is the importance of maintaining an evidence-based local approach. That's the best way to ensure we continue to enjoy the confidence of our communities, which is of the utmost importance. Chair, there's so much more that we could say about this crisis, but I'll leave it there, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Martin. One area that I'm not too sure whether you did cover is your oversight of the dynamic risk assessment, your risk assessment for the combination of COVID, Brexit and other potential concurrent events. Have you had any thoughts on that yet?
I have had thoughts on that, and I spoke to an MP about that last night, funnily enough. But to be fair, the governance is, the SCG looks at that. That is very much the SCG role, and it would be wrong for me to supersede that. And Simon represents me on the SCG. I'm happy to bring Simon in if you want to talk about that briefly, Simon.
I'm happy to, Commissioner. Yes. So the SCG, as the Commissioner has mentioned, met yesterday. We discussed this for the first time, and the view is that we're about to stand up a number of different subgroups under the SCG to manage this. So there is a EU exit group, there is a winter flu group, and there is a emerging demand group. And the idea is that we're going to see if we can mainstream those and bring them under one leadership. Currently, there was a strategic coordinating group and a recovery coordinating group that's supported by a tactical coordinating group underneath that. The tactical coordinating group was split in two under the COVID work and the recovery work, but that's now come together. So exactly the way that the chair's been asking in terms of that dynamic risk assessment and bringing and streamlining that work together to make sure there are no gaps, that's exactly what's happened. So we'll have more to say on that, I believe, next time round. But very early days at the moment, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. What I'm going to do now, panel members, as outlined in the informal briefing, I'm going to go through individual panel members to see if you have any questions that you would like to put on this particular item on the agenda. Please do not worry if you haven't got anything to say, then just acknowledge that you have no further questions. So I'm going to start with Peter Barrow.
No questions at present, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. George Farquhar?
No questions, thank you.
Les Fry?
Nothing at the moment, thank you.
May?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether it's appropriate to ask about the enforcement or what the enforcement will be for the rule of 6. And in particular, what I'm actually wanting to find out a bit more is how do members of the public report any potential breaches of the rule of 6, whether that's actually being covered or being currently, there's a plan in place for that. Thank you.
Shall I answer that, Chair?
Well, it does broach into the operational policing area. I'd be interested in your views on how you see your oversight of the rule of 6.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that question, May. I think 2 comments in reply to that. The first one, how will the public respond to the rule of 6? I launched a survey last night that hopefully some of the panel have seen. If not, please go to the PCC website or look at my Twitter account, because we are doing a very quick and dirty survey agreed with the MPs last night to see what the public view on enforcement is. And actually, I can give you some interesting stats from that, which help answer May's question before I tell you my view of how the public can tell the police about a breach. So we launched this 4 o'clock this afternoon. We've had 1,300 responses, which is quite encouraging. And question 2 was all about, do you think the police using the 3 E's, educate, encourage, etc., engage, before enforcement has been the right approach? And 92% of respondees said yes. The third question then gives them 5 options about what would you like to see happen now. In other words, do you think it's about right? Should police get a bit tougher? Should they ratchet this up a bit? And 56% of respondents have come back saying that they feel now the police should take a harder line. So that's really interesting to me. This was a very quick and dirty survey that we agreed with our local MPs and leaders to try and just gauge public opinion to help shape what the police do in Dorset. And it hasn't finished. It's only, 18 hours in, but already the responses are showing us very encouragingly that the public can support what we've done in the past, but now want to see some more stronger enforcement, which is in keeping with what the government is saying. So going back to May's last part of her question, we would ask, because of demand, and some forces have seen a 16 to 17% increase because of this demand, please report breaches of Rule of 6 by online 101. So that's 101@dorset.pn.police.uk, rather than picking the phone up, because the phone lines are starting to swamp nationally. To pick up the last point of May's, or the chair, I think, said, what is the PCC doing to oversee that? I get a weekly briefing, and I can tell you that the number of calls that have come into Dorset since the Prime Minister spoke are very low, surprisingly low. And actually, for the panel's benefit, although it is an operational question, it's the Chief Constable's decision, not mine, because of the survey results, because we are getting very, very low responses from the public complaining about breaches of Rule of 6, and because of the agreement between MPs, leaders and myself last night, the senior politicians in the county, we have agreed not to overreact and not to go out issuing tickets on every street corner. We will slowly ramp this up, but in a very slow and in a very slow way. We're not going to overreact. Now, some other areas have overreacted for a good reason. You've got to remember that we are still one of the lowest areas of risk from COVID in the country. So if you add those 3 things together, the risk level, the senior politicians' view, all of which we agree on, and the public response to my survey, I think we are taking the right approach, which is to ratchet up the notch it, but do it slowly. I hope that helps answer that question.
May, are you content?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much. Ian? Okay, I can't hear anything from Ian at the moment. Lisa?
No further from me. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Bill, you've got some points you want to raise?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Morning, Martin. Nice to see you up and about.
Morning, thanks.
Yeah, I did have a question on the if you'll give the panel some guidance on enforcement with the rule of 6. But I think we've had that answer now. But from March to August, are you able to give me numbers of dispersal notices that were issued by Dorset Police, and give perhaps a comparison with those that were issued by, say, let's say Devon and Cornwall Police, our collaborative partner in many areas of our policing, between March and August this year?
I'm not, Bill. Obviously, that's a very operational question. I don't have the stats in front of me. And we have issued dispersal notices. I'm aware, obviously, on the famous weekend in Bournemouth, when a major incident was called, a dispersal notice was authorised. I'm going to put this over to Dave Craig. He's on the meeting representing Dorset Police. He might have access to that stat. I doubt it, but if that is the case, we'll come back to you with a response at some stage. Dave, do you have that answer?
Martin, I don't have it to hand, but it is available or will be available. If given time, I'll send a message and see if I can get it by the end of the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think probably the best way forward on this is if you could put that information for Bill into the minutes. If you could fire it into Elaine, is that okay?
Yeah, sure, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Just one final point, Chairman. Yeah, the voluntary sector and charitable gatherings allow for more than 6 persons to be present at a gathering, as long as they're socially distanced. I think there's a question here of around, it borders on operational, I know, but forgive me, but will Dorset Police allow these gatherings, and how would they be distinguished from non voluntary sector charity gatherings by Dorset Police? Could you throw any light upon that one, Martin, please?
I can't from an operational point of view. You're the first person to ask me that, and I'm happy to take that away and come back to you. But obviously you and I both do a lot of charitable work, and I can tell you actually one of the main defining factors for that is the charity a limited company? Because if it is a limited company, then you could argue that it's a business meeting rather than a charity meeting. But I don't know. I'll come back to you. It's a really confusing area. Unfortunately, there are several areas which are just confusing, one of which is fox hunting. I've had quite a lot in my inbox or on social media about that. And the other is charity meetings. So I'll come back to you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
David, I think you've got some points you want to raise. David Taylor.
Work. Oh, sorry about that. My mic froze. It's a question really for you, Martin, and your force. We're noticing that the highways, I sit on Shadow Highways with Dorset Council, is poor condition. I'm just wondering if it's affecting your policing at all, and especially we've had major fatalities on one of the A37, for example. And I just wondered if you were actively involved in reporting or helping to report where they're discovering areas of poor condition.
I'm not in a position to answer that, David. I can say to you, obviously, that the police and our partners, including the Highways Agency and Dorset Council, always enforce or look at the 3 E's: education, enforcement and engineering. And engineering is the bit you're talking about here. What is the demographic of the road and the condition of the road in contributing to car crashes? I don't know the answer. I've got to say it's not been raised with me by the police. It does get raised with me a lot by public. Wherever I go, virtually now rather than in person, people are talking about fly tipping in rural locations, or they're talking about the condition of potholes on rural roads. But you will be aware that a huge amount of money has just been made available by the government to fix those potholes. So I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest.
Thank you very much for asking what you can.
Thank you very much for that. Ian, I understand you've got a question. You're back on.
Yeah, sorry about that. My little problem with my microphone. Then, don't know what happened. It's in relation to the enforcement part. You've now got 56% of people in the early part of the survey saying they want it ratcheted up. But the reality for the police, as I understand it nationally, was that they were issuing tickets, but because of the poorly framed legislation nationally, a lot of those were either being thrown out by CPS before, if people went not guilty. And I think the CPS head made the point that it showed the value of CPS. I think he was missing the point that because the poor legislation, officers were issuing tickets. When they go not guilty, they're getting thrown out because the legislation is poor. So the question is are the PCCs nationally with chief constables doing something to make sure that these new changes can be enforced? And if they do go to court, it's not going to be falling down because the legislation is poor.
Yeah, good question. I think my generic answer to that, before I go to Dorset, is that policing and the criminal justice system's got better at when to issue a ticket and how they issue a ticket. Certainly in Dorset, we have a higher rate of payment than the national average, but you will note from the publicity that actually the amount of non-payment of these fines, let alone the not guilties, is much higher than normal. So I think we're getting better at it. Clearly, because of what's just happened, these fines are going to be issued more. And of course, the amount of money involved is now a serious amount. An unauthorised gathering, a rave, for example, an 18-year-old man was given a £10,000 fine the other day. That's an awful lot of money. So I think it is going to, I think the prosecution rate and the payment rate will get better as all of the agencies become more conversant with issuing the tickets, basically.
Okay.
Sorry, just to follow up, but as I understand it, that the reason some of them are falling down at court is because the case is made out that the legislation has been poorly framed. So regardless of how good the officers are at issuing the tickets, if the legislation is poorly framed, it's not going to be successful at court. And I think that's the concern that I think looking ahead at how nationally that's going to be improved, because it just appears to me that the government have said, oh, we're upping the fines, but they haven't actually changed the legislation behind it.
They haven't, Ian, you're right. They have doubled the fines twice now, and they have changed the micro detail, which is where some of these cases are falling. You're right. I'm not aware about whether PCCs have got involved in that debate. I know the MPCC have, but I suppose time will tell. The government are constantly putting the new laws through. I would hope that they're going to tighten up the bill in relation to this when they put the new fines through as an SI.
Okay.
Conscious that, Bill, you want a supplementary?
Yes, please. It's on the six. Martin, what constitutes a group of six? Does that include children under a specific age, or do children up to a certain age, say 8, do they count at all as part of that six?
Bill, in fairness, that's, you're asking legal questions of the PCC. We should be here to support and scrutinise him if you get my gist.
Well, if he doesn't want to answer, he doesn't have to answer, but I've asked a question. It's up to you, Martin.
And I thank the chair for intervening, because it isn't actually my remit, but England is different to Scotland and Wales, and as an observation, I'm very depressed by that. We are the United Kingdom, and I would rather hope that the whole country would have the same approach. It causes a lot of confusion, and as you know, Scotland and Wales don't include children, and we do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Martin. Bobby.
Thank you. They are quite long questions, so Chair, it's up to you whether or not you would prefer a written response to the panel or whatever. I'll ask them both if I may, and then Chair and PCC, I'll let you decide how appropriate. Moving on from Ian's point regarding courts and obviously appeals and tickets being overturned. So it said in the minutes of the last meeting, the COVID-19 outbreak has had a significant impact on the criminal justice system, including postponement of all court cases from late March 2020. And the PCC and the OPCC officers have been actively engaged in the Wessex area response groups and Dorset Criminal Justice Board discussions around the challenges, appropriate responses and recovery plans to lockdown. Is that something you want to give us an update with offline? I didn't know if it was a pillar 3 or a COVID thing. It's affected by COVID, obviously, so I've raised it now.
To be honest, I think it spans across both, doesn't it? I would probably prefer to do this as a written response, only because there's so much to talk about in this space. Over and above what you said there, we now have a PCC group that meets with the Lord Chancellor on a 2-weekly basis because of the crisis in our courts. But there have been numerous changes since that report you've just read out, one of which is now the South West has a Nightingale Court in Cirencester, and we now have our Crown Court up and running, which we didn't have when that report was written, and we now have Salisbury as a breakout for Bournemouth. So there's been a lot of changes, Bobby. I think it would be better for me to give you a written response. There has been a lot of progress in this space, but equally, as I said to the policing minister last week, the pace of change and the pace of adaptation by HMCTS has been really slow. And I think one of the lessons we learned from COVID is some government departments are not fit for purpose. They do not adapt quickly to a crisis. And one of them is HMCTS, which is Her Majesty's Court Service.
Oh, thank you. My second question actually is about adapting to change. And I know that both local authorities did very well getting our street vulnerable people off the streets for the initial lockdown. But we know that came with its challenges, including Weymouth, where they had this spike in ASB. You had been working with both local authorities to try and prevent that from occurring again. I was just wondering if there was a short update to see how that work is ongoing, or have we just got out of the summer and these talks are just about to commence?
I think that's a really excellent question. Again, I'd probably prefer a written response because there's a lot going on, and this is an opportunity to brigade BCP Council. I think you have been one of the best in the South West in dealing with this issue, and I have said that to ministers and to other people, including Dorset Council. There have been issues in Dorset Council. I wrote to Dorset Council, as I think you're aware, challenging the mindset that all of the homeless should have been put into one location in the county. That has led to several meetings between the police, the council and myself. And I'm glad to say that there are now some really positive developments in Dorset Council in relation to the homelessness issue. I'm happy to do it, but I think a written explanation would be better. I have been very vocal in this space in relation to one of the 2 unitaries, and that has to be said. I think BCP responded very well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Martin, if I could ask for a written response to both those questions, which we would then put in the minutes rather than a standalone letter, if you don't mind. Tony, I haven't forgotten about you. Do you have any points you'd like to raise?
Yeah, it's sort of close to straying over into the operational thing, but one of the fears all along about the rule of 6 is that it could be used vexatiously and it can be used for some very petty offences. And I know an example was used a few weeks ago when I was inquiring about opening up youth clubs, and that some people may report seeing 7 or 8 young people playing football in an organised fashion, wasting sort of time on that, where there might be another group of youngsters, like there was last week, throwing bricks at people's doors or something. And but on that side of things, you mentioned the use of the 101 email, which I think is a very good way of filtering complaints, and I'm wondering whether that could be perhaps advertised more widely, possibly in sort of postal or local press and so on, so that people use that, and that it would be possible, for example, to prioritise reports on the rule of 6 to where there's actual antisocial behaviour or suspicious behaviour going on, rather than, you know, someone's had an extra granny over or something like that. I'm sort of wondering whether the 101 could be perhaps promoted as the filter for that kind of query, because otherwise I can see a lot of time being wasted on a lot of minor infringements when there could be more serious stuff going on that should be being prioritised.
So a few things there. Don't forget we have Ask Ned as well for the website, which is a brilliant way of filtering for the police. In respect to your question, Tony, we have a triage system, and the triage system is there to discern between someone having their granny round and breaking the rule of 6, as you call it, and 8 youngsters throwing bricks at windows. So I think we've got that bit covered, quite frankly. And I would just highlight that, because I'm not sure if members of the panel realise, any COVID-related call is logged as antisocial behaviour. So Dave is on the line, and he will correct me if I'm wrong, Dave Craig, but I believe we've seen a 16% increase in antisocial behaviour in Dorset, and that is mainly down to any call on COVID, because even if it's the one about the granny that you quoted, that is still logged as a personal ASB issue. So that is one of our problems, is that we're seeing antisocial behaviour go through the roof, and some of those are quite justified, and some of them actually are very low level historic COVID breaches, which normally wouldn't be dealt with by the police, but are because of what's going on. Dave Craig, could you just come in, and am I roughly right with a 14 or 16% increase?
You are, Martin. Yeah, ASB is the place that a lot of these things get coded, and from the outset, from the end of March, we've seen quite a dramatic rise in ASB.
Thank you for that, Tony. I know you've got a follow-up question, but I really must push on. I do apologise.
Well, it's sort of relevant to this actually, because yeah, I heard about this coding and COVID-related things as antisocial behaviour. Is there any way of getting that separated out and having a separate coding for things which obviously aren't antisocial behaviour in the traditional sense, but are COVID related? Because it does seem ridiculous that you know, an infringement of whatever is being classed as antisocial behaviour, and I would hope that at some point in the very near future that this is categorised as something else. You know, I would have thought there would have been a fairly easy categorisation that could be made to separate out the COVID related ones. I just really want to.
So if I could just come in on that, I disagree with you actually. We are 6 months or 7 months into this, and actually people get really scared by COVID breaches, particularly our elderly and the vulnerable. And antisocial behaviour is all about people's perception of feeling safe, and you don't feel safe if you're medically vulnerable and you're near someone who's breaching the rules. So I strongly support it being included as antisocial behaviour. And to answer your point, we can tell you which bits of it are COVID related and which bits aren't, which is why Dave and I both know we've got a 14 to 16% increase because of COVID calls. So I think we're okay. I think we're match fit. And I would strongly resist removing that as an antisocial behaviour flag, because I know from people I speak to, seeing someone not wearing a mask in a shop is actually more distressing to most people than someone's loud music next door.
Thank you for that, Martin. That's a very succinct and good answer. I'm going to close this item down now because I'm conscious of time. We've got two meaty items later on in the agenda. I'd like to move on to the nub of this meeting, which is the police and crime plan and the quarterly monitoring report for Q1 of this financial year.
Thank you, Chair. Before I take the panel through the quarterly report, I'd like to hand over to my Director of Operations, Adam, who's going to run through a few of the changes that the office has made since the last formal meeting in February. I mentioned this earlier on in the meeting. It's about our priorities. and what we're doing in this unexpected year of me being PCC.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. As most members will be aware, this report was created alongside the panel so that members and the wider public could see the progress being made against the various commitments the Commissioner made in support of the Police and Crime Plan. It's divided into 4 pillars, as we know, and the Commissioner will duly talk through those one by one, as we would usually do, and he'll provide the performance data and progress reports as he does so. As we know, earlier this year and before the pandemic caused a delay to the PCC elections, the panel heard that almost all of the 100 commitments that had been set by the Commissioner had been met, or turned green, if you use the vernacular we have for the report. The front page of this report, this is page 61 in the packs, provides a reminder of that progress. So you have the 4 pillars there, and you'll see it's those wheels divide out what was achieved in those original 100 commitments. And again, just to make sure we're all up to speed, you see there, pillar 1. 25 of the original 100 commitments were assigned to that pillar. All were assessed as either blue or green, and blue was achieved in the first 100 days. Pillar 2, 29 of those 100 were for pillar 2, working with our communities. They included the problem solving forums, and all again were assessed as blue or green by Q3 2019-20. Pillar 3, 13 of the 100 commitments. Now, all of those were green and blue, apart from that red commitment you'll see there, which relates to the CRCs, and that's the Commissioner will come to that later. And then finally, pillar 4, transforming for the future. 33 of the original 100 commitments, and all but 1 were assessed as green by Q3 2019-20. And the yellow commitment referred to pooled partnership budgets. So just an overview there of where we were before the world rather changed somewhat earlier this year. And this year, with this extra unexpected year, you'll be aware the Commissioner outlined 3 key areas of focus: vulnerability, antisocial behaviour, and violence reduction. And in addition to this, the Commissioner and his team have identified a number of other opportunities and developments that we'll be working on throughout the year, which of course the Commissioner will come to. These commitments, of which there are 26 in total, they represent 13 brand new undertakings and 14 continuations from last year. So things where we have identified clearly that there is more that can be done in these 12 months, or more that was going to be done anyway, that we would like to specifically highlight. Of course, it's really exciting to share these with you for the first time today and provide a current update on our aims and progress. But it's not to say that that there won't be other commitments throughout the year, or nor that we turn a blind eye to the areas that have been raised in the past. Of course, that's not the case. But we felt it necessary with this report, and based on some feedback last time round, to really focus and highlight those areas that we're particularly working on, so that the panel in turn and the public can more easily focus on this year's activity. I should also say that, as always, the team are on hand to meet with the pillar leads, to talk through any of those in more detail. And for members of the public who might be watching on today, I'd like to take the opportunity to say that apart from the papers submitted to this panel in the past, a great deal of information on the original list of commitments and progress we make will be available at dorsetpoliceplan.com. And so thank you, and over to Commissioner.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Chair. So Q1 are 4 pillars, and obviously the panel have got this in front of them, and members of the public, if you look at the agenda, it's under item 7 on the agenda, which will show you what we're talking through. And we've colour coded what we call our dashboard, and I'll highlight some of the issues so that it will give members of the panel some hooks, if you like, to ask questions. And as we've already said, clearly Q1 has been predominantly spent adjusting to COVID-19, supporting the policing and wider partnership response to the pandemic, and developing a work plan for the unexpected year of my term. I think that the most significant thing of all 4 pillars, and the thing I'm proudest of, is the next issue, which is our extraordinary funding scheme, which we launched very quickly. And I do thank Dorset Community Foundation for helping me with this. we worked together to get out there very quickly to provide money to small charities who were affected by COVID-19, and we're doing COVID-19 work in the community. And we specifically focused on victims and offender charities. And from start to finish, we delivered this within 2 weeks by extending the existing Safer Dorset Fund scheme. And a total of 21 funding requests were agreed, and £65,000 was awarded in grants. And we're doing further grants for community youth projects and youth diversion work. Only this week we have intervened in a boxing club in Blandford. So regular blogs are published by me on mental health and cyber safety, as you know. I'm going to leave it there on Pillar 1. And Chair, I know you would like to have some questions put forward on that pillar.
Thank you very much, Martin. For your information on Pillar 1, we've got Lisa Northover has just taken over, new panel member, and also hot off the press, Peter Barrow will be supporting, or Lisa and Peter will be working together under Pillar 1, and hopefully at some stage or other they will have a one-to-one chat with your team over in Winfrith or by virtual. Lisa, could I ask you to lead on this area, please?
Well, I've not seen anybody else lead, so I don't know exactly what that looks like. But I do have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So yesterday I heard one of the law commissioners talking about including misogyny as in with hate crime, and I think the law commissioner has recommended that sex becomes a protected characteristic. And as part of those conversations, I think I had an interview with her where she was saying that some forces already record when it's a motivating or exacerbating sort of factor if it's hatred towards women. And I wondered what you think about that, and also whether or not we do record when that is a factor in crime, even though we don't have to.
Thanks for that, Lisa. Really good question. So firstly, my answer to that is I didn't know about the Law Commission ruling yesterday, but I will say it's a hugely complex area. There are occasionally issues that divide not just society but policing and politicians. One, of course, is assisted suicide, and the other one is this one. This has had a really, really hot debate for over a year. And what you're referring to started in Nottingham with the wolf whistles, where police in Nottingham and then in Yorkshire said they would prosecute people, men, for wolf whistling at women walking past a building site, which is misogynistic. I haven't got a view, actually. It's because it is so complicated. It's one of those issues, rather like the badger cull, where I will take the view that the government takes. On this one, I can tell you Dorset Police don't share that view, and Dorset Police don't record a misogynistic crime as a hate crime. And to be fair, that's the Chief Constable's decision, not mine. But it isn't an area that I've lobbied for or against. And actually, because I've got so many politicians on the line, we're really interested to know the panel's view on this. But I know that will completely disrupt the chair's plan for today. But if the members could share with me their views on this by email, I'd be really grateful, because it is a really complicated and very controversial topic, which brings emotion in every level, and we have to be really careful how we manage that.
Do you wish to follow up at all, Lisa?
No, I don't need to follow up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, by exception, does any recognising that you panel members will get an opportunity to ask questions later on about the whole quarterly review, does anybody have anything specific that they really wish to talk about on Pillar 1?
Yes, please, Chair. Is that okay? May I go ahead?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I was just looking at item 83 and continue work to remove barriers to reporting hate crime, especially when I appreciate the crimes have gone up slightly, but the incidents have decreased by 14.4%. You say earlier in the report that PCC has commissioned CAB for raising awareness of hate crime. I didn't see any of this campaign, so therefore I wondered who it was aimed at, media channels you were using, the cost, but also how your effectiveness is measured, please.
Okay, there was a lot in that question, Bobby. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pass that to Simon because he's better placed to answer it. But I will say that we launched this initiative just as lockdown happened. So we didn't anticipate lockdown, and I was really excited by this project. But Simon is better placed, so I'm going to ask Simon to come in.
So we worked with Citizens Voice in BCP, and they essentially put together a video which was highlighting the best practice around hate crime. So in what circumstances it should be reported and to whom. Well, I'll see if I can find the video and put it in the link so you can look at it now. But essentially that went live probably about a month or so ago. Haven't had any evaluation from that as yet because it's literally just gone out, but we can certainly get that back to you once that comes through.
Thank you.
Les, quickly, I think you've got something.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Commissioner, one of the areas we're very aware of as topical is domestic abuse, and in the absence of Councillor Rennie, who would be asking you this question, do you know what the current situation is domestic abuse across Dorset is during lockdown and the difficult times that people have experienced?
Yes, thank you for that question. You're right, Molly would have asked that question. We know Molly well. So during lockdown, things were very steady because obviously people were locked down. We expected a massive surge, as you know, because I explained this to the panel last time, in sexual offences and domestic abuse reports once lockdown ended. And that wasn't the case. So Dave Craig, I'm just giving you a heads up that I'm coming your way. Dave will tell you an overview of what's happened with domestic abuse since lockdown ended. But from memory, from my point of view, we've had an increase, but nowhere near as much as was expected. And I don't think we're anywhere near the national average. So that's good news, but we can't be complacent, can we? What that could tell us is the abuse has happened, but it hasn't been reported. So it's very much on my radar. And even more so with what's going on at the moment, there's so much uncertainty, guys. You know, we could be going back in another full lockdown. I mean, I couldn't get over yesterday's figures. I mean, that's nearly 100% increase in 5 days. And if we go into another lockdown, we're going back into this whole nightmare of victims being subdued and kept inside an address and unable to seek help from third parties, charities or the police. Dave, could I just bring you in to see if I'm roughly right, and hopefully you'll be able to give some stats.
Thanks, Commissioner. That's exactly my fears in the lockdown, that people are trapped in a house with perhaps somebody they shouldn't or wouldn't want to be in. Yeah.
Chair, Dave Craig, happy to give some stats around that, or the trend in lockdown, if you want.
No, would you mind putting those into the minutes if you're happy with that, Les?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dave. Tony, I believe you. Quick question.
No, I think that's a historical one. I'm not sure
Okay,
why my name's appeared under someone else.
Okay, thanks for that. Moving on to Pillar 2 then. Same two players working on Pillar 2 from the panel's perspective. That's Les Fry and Dave Taylor. Martin, could I ask you to give a brief overview on your progress on Pillar 2?
Thank you, Chair. And for all members of the public watching, Pillar 2 is arguably why I'm here, which is working with our communities in relation to engagement and social behaviour and getting citizens involved and engaged with policing. So 29 of our original 100 commitments were assigned to Pillar 2, and highlights by exception in this area. We agreed to do a temperature check on how the public were perceiving the force's response to the pandemic, and a survey was undertaken by the OPCC, as you know, and we received 2,628 responses. The vast majority felt that Dorset Police did an excellent or good job and that public messaging had been clear. And that, of course, was before we had the survey we did yesterday. The driver awareness scheme was delivered online for the first time during the lockdown, and actually we have led nationally on that. We actually do a webinar which has received fantastic feedback and massive engagement. Most people being offered an online webinar are taking it. And of course, never forgetting that the driver awareness scheme is there to reduce casualties and keep people safe. Implementation of our successful bid to the Home Office Safer Streets Fund will be a significant strand of work, and this bid included plans to further expand the Bobby van. We've secured £266,000 to tackle burglary and acquisitive crimes in Folkestone and Boscombe. And that I'm very excited by that because of the BCP bid that the BCP councillors will be aware of, and I know Jane Kelly is helping to lead on that work with Martha. The huge bid that BCP is putting in to redevelop Boscombe is very exciting to me and to the police. And then, of course, we've recently closed our antisocial behaviour survey, which we ran through the summer. And we've, as a force, we've published very strong messages on calling out racist behaviour and tackling stop and search disproportionality, which is a subject of the report later in today's meeting. So there's quite a lot there. I'm happy to expand on some of those if you want me to.
Les?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, I would perhaps suggest as councillors, we've struggled to do our duty on this with the community work and get involved, which is probably the same as the police are struggling at this time to engage with the community, such as the Bobby van. There's not much you can do with that when people are in lockdown in limited groups. I would suggest the figures are also going to be distorted. ASB is up for the reasons already discussed, and other crimes are down because of the lockdown situations.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I do think things are starting to morph into the new normal. And interestingly, I only found out yesterday, nationally last month, crime went down by 5%. And we're no longer really in lockdown. So I find that quite an interesting stat. But you're right. The Bobby van actually was used successfully last week. Quite a lot of social media interest in that. A lady who appealed to myself and the Chief Constable on Twitter saying, I need help, and the Bobby van was that help. So we are using Bobby van. I think we're coming out of lockdown, Les. Our crime reporting and certainly our demand, we haven't talked about demand yet. Demand is now higher than it's ever been. And that's because we've got COVID on top of normal police work, business as usual. So I don't think we're going to have a huge deluge of crimes coming through when we return back to normal. I think we are returning to the new normal, and I think crimes are being recorded. I am interested that crime's gone down by 5% last month nationally because the month before it went up. So it's very fluid at the moment.
Thank you. And you got item 24, further road safety. Are you doing much with the dash cam scheme? Is that been, I know you've Operation Snap, I think it is.
Yeah, Operation Snap is still continuing and is very successful. And we have other work in the pipeline with that. Obviously, you'll have seen it because you live in Dorset. We've virtually digitalised nearly all of our speed cameras now, which is fantastic. And that's a long time coming. That was 6 years ago. We tried to find the money to do that. And we've got our online road safety improvements. So I think road safety is a good place at the moment. What I would ask all of the panel to look at is there's a national road safety survey going on at the moment, led by PCCs. Alison Hernandez is the national lead. I'm the deputy lead for road safety. And we put out a survey across the whole of the country asking people's views on enforcement and road safety concerns. So please do fill in that survey. What I'll do is get that put into the minutes. I'm looking at Adam. If we could circulate that to the councillors, that'd be really useful.
Thank you. That's really good. Thank you.
David, do you have any points you'd like to raise?
Yeah, just one brief one. I touched it before with you, Martin. Commissioner, sorry. The road safety COVID borders. Now, do we have a system in place in case, as you know, as you dictated, the figures have gone up quite high so far, and are we ready with our borders in case we need to shut things down?
Yeah, you did raise this last time. Yes, we are. The SCG is in charge of that, not me. But as I explained to you at the last meeting, Dorset as a county will have, oh, thank you. I've just seen Adam's put the road safety survey on the link. Dorset as a county does have an option of shutting down. Obviously, the government response to COVID is localised, and our two unitaries could decide individually or together to lock down. And the SCG has that in hand. I don't think it's going to be very likely. The good news is, and we must take away the good news, is that the Southwest remains and always has always been the lowest risk area of the country in relation to this awful disease.
I totally agree with you. Thank you very much, Martin.
Bobby, I think you've got 2 quick questions.
I do, thank you. Page 47 talks about the OPCC's bids for tackling burglary and acquisitive crime. So an update on that bid, was it successful, how much for, how used, and the measures of the outcome? And if it was put into place and it wasn't successful, do we have an alternative plan?
Sorry, Bobby, I'm thrown by that. Are you talking about the last minutes?
No, in your Pillar 2, you talk about having bids for tackling crime and acquisitive crimes. So it's just when it came into Pillar 2.
Oh, sorry, when you mentioned 47, I thought you meant...
Sorry, page 47 on our pack, so you knew where I was referring.
Sorry, yeah, okay, my fault, I got confused. I'll bring Simon in on that because Simon has overseen that bid for us. Simon?
Yes, Commissioner. So essentially, we're just about in the receiving stage of that money coming in. So we haven't got quite to the implementation phases yet, I'm afraid. So we're still probably a number of months away from being delivery on that one. But again, we'll keep members updated on that work as it develops.
Okay, thank you. And I think question 2 will be along the same lines, particularly as we obviously had the close down of courts. But you were, or you wrote, there was a series of prosecutions for fly tipping. I was wondering about the court outcomes, and if they were successful, will this model be rolled out elsewhere where there are trouble spots, or will there be a lull if it is considered a seasonal crime?
So I can't answer that question because obviously we're not the prosecuting agency. Dorset Council's, I'm trying to think the name of the agency, it's gone, but it's not led by us, it's led by the councils. So I can't give you the stats actually on or the success stories of those, but I can tell you because I monitor it, it's not a seasonal crime. Sadly, it's on the increase across the whole of the year, and it's becoming more and more of an issue since lockdown.
Okay, so is that something you want us to take up as individual members, or is that something you will have oversight on regarding the model, etc.? I know it's something that the police were working with, and I think you put your name to the programme, didn't you?
Yeah, I did put my name to the programme, and I did provide some funding for the analyst. So I'm happy to lead on that. I'll take that. I'm looking at Adam. I'll take that as an action to come back to you as to whether we think that's worked, whether it's good practice, and whether the prosecutions have gone up. I think they have gone up. All I'm hearing on fly tipping at the moment is good news, but it isn't, definitely it's not seasonal. It's just happening all the time, and it's blighting people's lives. Actually, we really do need to ramp it up, our response to it as a community.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Martin.
I'm going to move on to Pillar 3, if that's okay, Martin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So Pillar 3 for the members of the public is supporting victims, witnesses and reducing reoffending. And our key flags, if you like, are domestic abuse, sexual violence, victim satisfaction and reducing reoffending. And most of the panel will know that this has always been a troubled area for me because most of what I want to achieve has been blocked, if you like, by national issues. The Transforming Rehabilitation Programme was a failure. There's no other way of putting that. Even government ministers now accept that. And that stopped the through the gate services that were so important to all of us as councillors and PCC. So it's never been a brilliant area for me because I feel I've lacked the funding and the initiatives to be able to make a big difference. And a good example of that is Commitment 33, which is to work with the Community Rehabilitation Company to improve offender mentoring services, and that just hasn't happened. But the good news is we have new contracts issued, we have a new CRC. I am seeing a new energy in the CRC, which ironically will start delivering, I suspect, in the next PCC term. But highlights by exception, recommissioning work on a number of key services will feature prominently during the rest of my term, including Shaw's, the Sexual Assault Referral Clinic, and the Individual Sexual Violence Advisor ISVA's service. And in June, Dorset OPTC successfully received about £200,000 of extraordinary victims funding, which came out through COVID, providing emergency support to vital domestic abuse and sexual violence services in the county. And a further successful bid was submitted by us in June for additional funding for our Dorset ISVA service. And short-term funding has been agreed for an independent stalking advocacy caseworker called an ISAC. That's a new name for most of you. And funding has also been agreed for a one-year contract to enhance offender tag provision in support of the Integrated Offender Management Programme, IOM, that most of you will know the name of. What I haven't mentioned there in that update by exception is the whole issue that Bobby's talked about earlier, which is the crisis in our criminal justice system. And that crisis does need a written response from me because it's so varied. The crisis is everywhere, from delays in court listings to the practicalities of having juries in a room with social distancing, to the use of video-enabled justice, which was rolled out during COVID and has caused major issues for policing. We've taken away a lot of work for the private providers such as G4S and the courts, but we've added massive burdens to the police in using video-enabled justice in the Southwest, which actually was a result, led to a meeting with ministers this week. So there's so much going on. Our Crown courts were all shut and now some of them are open. Some of our magistrates courts have reopened but, in a new normal. Our listings are several months behind where they should be. And of course, nationally and locally, we need to remember that courts and court listings were horribly slow before COVID. So it's just added to a poor situation becoming worse. So I think I do have to give you a written response on that because there's so much going on in that space. And I have been, if you said to me in the last 2 months, what's the main thing you've done, Martin? It's agitating this space. All PCCs are in conference with the Home Office, with the MOJ and with ministers regularly, regionally and locally, to try and resolve this. Because, and I said this earlier, the HMCTS are not fleet of foot. They take weeks and months just to agree an idea, like a Nightingale court. I mean, Nightingale courts were being talked about me to this panel at the last meeting. It was being discussed since April, and the first one's open last week. It's just scandalous that it's taken so long. But there we are. So I'll give a written response on the court bit, and that is the other highlights from this pillar, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very, very, very briefly, can you put a little bit of colour on what this backlog is?
Okay, the backlog is that when lockdown came in, the courts had to shut, and the courts couldn't reopen. And the reason they couldn't reopen is because courts aren't built for social distancing. So in the Southwest, in our area, you've got the Southwest, and then you've got a subsection of that is Wessex, which is our Crown Prosecution Service and court area, which is Wiltshire, Hampshire and Dorset. And across those three areas, we only found one court, which was Portsmouth, that could reopen immediately because it was a new court and it did have the ability to socially distance juries and barristers and judges. So, and the same thing happened in the magistrates' courts. So the blockage has been caused by the fact that we just cannot open the courts because of social distancing. And there was a lot of political pressure put on the government, take away the 2 metre rule and bring in 1+. And one of the main levers for that was courts. And of course, when they brought in 1 metre+, courts were able to slowly start reopening. And that's the point, you see, that's the point I was making. HMCTS took about 6 weeks after the government went to 1 metre+ to actually convert their buildings and reopen. Scandalous, really. I mean, most organisations would have done it in a week. Yeah. And the ideas such as Nightingale courts, extended sittings, working at weekends, that went round and round the buoy for 3 months, which is just not acceptable. So we really effectively have halted all prosecutions in this country for about 4 months. We've now started getting back into the swing, but we're still not there. From memory, and this is only memory, I think 30% of planned prosecutions are happening at the moment as opposed to 100%. So it's a really slow wake up from a deep slumber, and it's failing victims poorly because we're not as bad as some parts of the country, but if you report a crime at the moment, you could wait, and we catch the offender, you could wait 2 to 3 years for that case to go to trial, which is just a nightmare, and is, in my view, the biggest emergency that policing and the criminal justice system has faced for 30 years. It's a real problem.
Thank you for that. I will now hand over to the pillar leads, which you'll be pleased to know is Councillor Bill Pipe and May Haynes, volunteers to take on pillar 3. Bill, sorry.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I'm still concerned, Martin, that the Sexual Assault Referral Centre still does not have dedicated officers anymore. If you walk in there, they bring somebody down from upstairs in CID. You know, we used to have 2 very dedicated, very experienced, very compassionate female officers working in the SARC who are no longer working there. I think it's imperative that if these 2 officers can be brought back, although even if they're still working upstairs in CID, that if somebody walks through the door, they get them, not somebody else who doesn't have the experience. And I'm very concerned about that, particularly when you get walk-in cases, as you know, I know about, you know about, having visited the SARC on a number of occasions. I really would want these 2 officers, you know, back as dedicated SARC ISVAs.
So I'm not aware of this issue, Bill. No one's raised this with me. And to be fair, it's an operational issue. It's a Chief Constable decision who polices the SARC. I'm happy to take that away as an action because I wasn't aware of it. Spookily, I was due to be at the SARC 2 weeks ago to meet them face to face, but we had to cancel that meeting, and I think I'm going the week after next. So I will come back to you. I'll take that as an action, and I will raise that issue myself when I'm there in a few weeks' time.
Thank you very much. And on the Nightingale courts, and I know we've heard from you already on this, but to have one Nightingale court in the southwest stuck away somewhere, is it in Cirencester?
It is Cirencester.
That's no use to us at all, is it?
No, it's not. Yeah, how long have you got? Dorset put up 2 locations for Nightingale Court. One of them was the BIC. We could have easily accommodated Nightingale Court in Dorset, which would have helped reduce our backlog, particularly as Bournemouth Court was the last court to reopen in the Wessex region, and we were ignored. So, as I say, how long have you got? What use is a Nightingale Court in Cirencester, which is in the north of the southwest region, and will probably serve the West Midlands far better than it will serve the southwest?
Absolutely. The Weymouth court system, as we all know, is very, very overused, shall we say. But in the same breath, it's not being overused because there's so many multiple listings going through the Weymouth court system, as with Bournemouth Crown Court. What pressure can you bring to bear? I know we've spoken about this already, but what pressure can you actually bring to bear on the judicial system, and in particular ministers, to actually get more run through on the court system and try and reduce the multiple listings? Because the multiple listings, if you don't get called, that's more frustrations for the witnesses, more frustrations for the families. They maybe have to travel, and they just get told, oh, come back on Tuesday or next Wednesday, and they still don't get called. You know, it's really quite unacceptable that the witnesses and the like and the victims have to go through this process.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think triple listings is a COVID issue. That's always existed. Double and triple listings are the bane of my life as Police Crime Commissioner because of the appalling service it gives to victims. You say what power, what can I bring to bear? I sit on the Dorset Criminal Justice Board. The Chief Constable chairs it. It is the court backlog is the biggest priority for this area. It is, as I said earlier, in my view, the biggest crisis in the criminal justice system in the last 30 years, nationally and locally. And we are doing a lot to rectify that. And that's why I said I'll give a written response, because this was originally a question.
Yes, I understand.
And there's a lot to write about. I'm doing a lot in this space, so is the Chief Constable. So, to be fair, are our partners. Everybody is focused on we have to reduce this backlog. And there has been considerable progress made. I would argue the progress has been very slow, but nevertheless, we have got progress made, and we now have running Crown Courts, 2 in fact, and we now have running Magistrates Courts. Neither of those were the case 8 weeks ago. So I'm not happy, but I am agitating a lot in this space.
You've just frozen.
Oh, have I? Hello?
Yeah.
No. Everyone's here.
Could you just finish your last sentence? Because you
Sorry, I didn't realise I'd frozen. I'm not happy, but I am agitating in this space a lot, is what I finished by saying.
Okay, and finally from me, the area of red with the community rehabilitation companies, new contract, that's great. When do you think we're likely to see any actual progress now that we have a new contract? With is it with a new company or was it with the old one?
No, it is with a new company. I'll bring Simon.
I thought it was.
I'll bring Simon in on this because he is more cited than me in the last few weeks. But I think we'll start seeing tangible results by Christmas. Mentoring is back on the agenda, which is good, and through the gate services are starting to be picked up, not just by the CRC, but by prisons. That's back on their agenda as well. So I'll bring Simon in just to give you an update, because I have been out of the loop for a few weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. There is some regional work that's underway. So the 5 police and crime commissioners across the southwest, part of a Southwest Reducing Reoffending Board that has closer links into the CRC. It is quite slow. It is quite difficult as well. I think that we've got a good plan in place. We've got some key work that we're trying to move forward on. Members will be fully aware that here in Dorset we've been pushing work around veterans, and we continue to do that. The balance has been, though, that we are trying to get a good mix between regional work and local work. And at the moment, it's probably fair to say that we are very much focused on the local rather than the region, but we're still continuing to push that.
Okay, you mentioned there, Simon, veterans, which lit a light bulb in my dim brain. Are we still functioning at Portland Prison with the veterans wing during COVID?
So we had a good update from the Dorset Prison Governors at SCG only yesterday. Who said that there has been no case of a prisoner in Dorset testing positive for COVID. So essentially, systems and processes remain as they have been throughout.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you. I've finished now, so I'll take my call. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Good stuff. May, do you have anything you want to raise?
Nothing further to add, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Pillar 4. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So for the members of the public, Pillar 4 was a new pillar when I started my second term, Transforming for the Future, and that was because policing was going through so many changes so quickly. And our flags for that, if you like, are funding and resources, innovation and service improvement, and of course now dealing with COVID-19. So 33 of the original 100 commitments were assigned to this pillar. Most have been completed, as you know. And at the last panel, I gave you details of the extraordinary scrutiny. Adam led you through the fixed penalty notices deep dive that we did. And I'm going to refer to that during the stop search bit, because it's important to realise that although stop search and Dorset immediately linked to disproportionality, that isn't the case in relation to the issue of COVID tickets. So I'll talk about that later under a different subsection of this meeting. I also undertook the national #unacceptable campaign against attacks on emergency service workers, and clearly, you know, credit where credit's due, this government is very strong in this space and has now doubled sentences. Obviously, the white paper was announced last week, and that's good to see. Yeah, I mean, it's just good to see a complete change in public mood, a complete change in government mood towards all emergency workers, including ambulance and fire, being attacked or verbally abused whilst trying to serve the public. Having begun in February 2020, Q1 saw 12 police complaint reviews received by my office, and you'll remember that Adam led you through that in the last meeting. The new processes were embedded as anticipated, and the service is, in my view, being delivered professionally and independently. And of course, I'm doing regular blogs and updates on the COVID-19 response. I have to say, the biggest feedback I get on COVID, I didn't mention it in the COVID update, and I make no apologies, I stole this with pride, is the updates the Chief Constable and I wrote to all our key stakeholders and members of the public about what's happening in Dorset with COVID. But we stole it from Avon and Somerset. I looked at it and thought that's a brilliant way to do things. And we get great feedback on that. It really is a good way of updating people once a week, once a fortnight, as to what is happening in the world of policing and COVID. And we get great responses from that, from the public and from our partners. So that's the end of my fourth pillar.
I have to say it's a very useful document that you push out as well to bring people up to speed of what you're actually doing, both within your office and on the operational framework. Ian, would you like to lead, if you wouldn't mind, please?
Yeah. First of all, Mike, can I put an action to myself, which is that in October I will email Adam to set a date as to when we'd look to do a scrutiny of the complaints. We're basing that on what Adam will let us know when we get to a level that we've got sufficient data that will make it worthwhile. So it's going to go into 2021. And then also I'll take the opportunity to discuss with him sort of starting to frame the key lines of inquiry, and then we can maybe do a document for the next meeting. But that's an action for me in October, please. So my first question then is in relation to establishment. You touched on it at the start, Martin, in relation to the uplift money. Unless I misunderstood it, is it right then that the uplift money that Dorset have had has now all been spent on the officers that now have joined, i.e. the 50 new ones and the 2 transferee sessions?
Yeah, in brief, yes. We've received the year 1 funding. We were promised year 2 funding and we haven't got that. If we want to drill down into that, happy to bring Julie in, but that's basically where we are. And I touched on that in my COVID update. I am concerned, and this isn't a political point at all. It's just a genuinely felt belief that the country's bankrupt. And actually, are they going to be able to pay for the 2nd year? I don't know. You know, and we're not getting any confirmation the 2nd year funding is on its way. So it is a bit worrying for me as the person running the budget. But let's bring Julie in just to make sure I haven't got that wrong.
No, the Commissioner is completely right. We're spending the money that we've got in the current year, hitting the targets, but we have no confirmations of targets or funding for years 2 and 3.
Okay, thank you. So the follow-up as well then to that is I think we put in the forward work plan, Chair, that we would look to get a report effective from the Chief Constable and the PCC as to where those additional officers have actually gone. So can I just reinforce that we need to make sure that we do that in the forward work plan and give the Chief Constable and the PCC sufficient time to get that data together?
Yeah, obviously with the question will be placed on the PCC, and how he decides to handle it will be up to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just say I welcome that, Ian. I think I've just started scrutinising where I had to let this bed in. I had to let the officers arrive. we have an ACC in charge of where does the uplift go, and that's Sam Derrea. For some of the panel, some of the new members of the panel, you may not know Sam Derrea. She is a transferee from Devon and Cornwall, our new Assistant Chief Constable, and she has a plan as to where that uplift goes, and not surprisingly, a lot of the uplift will go towards vulnerability in all angles of policing. But I welcome the scrutiny from you as to how I've influenced that. So actually last night, interestingly, I put my first request into the Chief Constable for an uplift to go to a certain part of this county. I'm not going to say where, but I copied that into the local MP and the local councillors who had lobbied me for me to increase policing in that area. And as I have all of the councillors across Dorset on this call, I would invite you to consider that. You can't just say, can I have 3 more officers, please? Thanks, Tony. It doesn't work like that. But actually, this particular area of Dorset has put a lot of time and thought into how the uplift could improve their local policing. They had the demand and the public support behind that, and I strongly endorsed that recommendation to the Chief Constable for 2 officers to go to a particular part of this county. That is open to anyone else on this call. I am here to represent the public, and you are the public. You are elected by your people. So I would just highlight that, and I welcome the scrutiny as time rolls on as to what I've done to influence where that uplift goes.
And I think that's where, from the public's point of view, you've got the 2 issues of the public want to see more police officers, but also the Chief Constable's got to provide those police officers to meet critical functions that to the general public can at times be unseen. So I think that's where we would want to see, when we do our scrutiny, how that's working, to see how the Chief Constable is meeting those 2 areas that you as the PCC would want to scrutinise him on.
Yeah,
I've nearly written a Chloe there, haven't I, Chair? Sorry about that.
No, thank you very much for that that reminder as well, Ian. And Mark, can we make sure that's double tapped into the board work plan, please?
And I don't know if now is the time. Bill might have had a follow-up question in relation to the uplift as well. So I don't know if you want to just check that before we move on.
Bill?
He's on the phone.
Sorry, did somebody call me?
I understand that you wanted to do a question on transformation. Is that correct?
I think Ian's pretty much covered it on the expenditure and how much is left, if anything.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I can't call her a cleaner these days. I think they like to be referred to as domestic operatives, running around with a Hoover.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ian, have you got any other points you'd like to raise?
Well, apart from far too much detail, in relation to funds, I think we've covered it in there. I understand why that's yellow, because there's funding that the government have promised. So I think we just keep with the COVID updates, and that covers that fine. So there's nothing else from me, but obviously we've got funding and resources to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to literally whip through the panel, see if there's any points that want to be raised on the quarterly review, and then proceed onto the finance area with Julie. So starting off with David Taylor, do you have any further points you'd like to raise on the quarterly review?
No, I'm fine. Thank you with what's going on. Thank you very much.
Bill?
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Lisa?
No, nothing from me.
Tony? Ian?
No, nothing here.
Ian?
Nothing, thank you.
No. May?
Nothing further, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Les?
Please, yep, 3 things. One's a statement, really. The Chair, Commissioner, the modern technology has been raised with me by one of my constituents this morning during this meeting, that written responses, although I absolutely appreciate the situation we put the Commissioner in by asking some questions, it doesn't give the panel the opportunity to respond or ask questions about those written responses, nor the public who are viewing this meeting on YouTube to be aware or comment on it at all or have a view on it.
No,
so it's
but
just something.
I would argue that it will go into the minutes. The answer from the PCC will go into the minutes. Those minutes are made public, and should the panel wish to have a follow-up questions on the answers provided by the PCC, they will be undertaken at the next meeting.
Absolutely, and that's the point I mean, that there's a delayed response in getting some of those issues that may be topical today, may not be in 3 months' time.
Yeah.
That's my point, one point made. Commissioner, is there still a drift of officers towards the conurbation away from West Dorset?
I'll answer the first point, Les, then answer that question. It is useful to remember you're a scrutiny panel, and therefore you are meant to be scrutinising after the fact. So I totally get your point about what's relevant now isn't relevant in 3 months' time. And the member of the public who contacted you probably wanted a question about COVID, but that we're not a real-time panel. You're here to scrutinise what I've done in the last 3 months. We're talking about Q1 here, not Q2. So I would push back on that, actually. I know the member of the public probably didn't realise that, and I'm not trying to be rude to the member of the public, but when you ask me something like what's happening in courts, I would probably furnish you with a 4 or 5 page report as to what's happening in courts. It's just, I can't draw all of that out of my head without any notice. You know, I suppose my comeback to you would be, give me advance notice you want to talk to me about courts, and I would have had an answer prepared. It's just such a huge data area. I just can't, and it would be wrong and disingenuous for me to make it up. That's the point. Anyway, going to your other point, I hope that answers the member of the public's point, because I'm not trying to avoid issues. I'm trying to give accurate information, and the balance between those two is difficult. The second question, no, there isn't a drift between the conurbation from West Dorset. Interesting you asked that question, but we have seen real tests of policing in West Dorset with COVID, and I'm not talking about your area actually. I'm talking about Lyme Regis and Bridport have seen massive demand issues, partly caused by the change in demographic in Lyme Regis. There's now a bar on the beach which has never been there before, and that's caused different demand and different antisocial behaviour issues. But no, to my knowledge, there's no change in demographic of the officers on the beat. We haven't moved anyone into the conurbation. Certainly in the last few months, the status quo is as it was.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
George?
Nothing other than to thank the PCC in this unexpected year, and also to pass on my thanks to the OPCC for the work that they've done through very difficult circumstances. I know for public services, then it's been a tremendous strain, particularly working remotely, and to work with different systems, etc., to continue to deliver the level of service that the public have come to expect and rely on.
Thank you for that. Bobby? No, thank you. Peter?
No, nothing at present, thank you.
Right. I've a couple of notes flying around on the chat line there. We will have a break after the next element, which is the part of the quarterly review, which is the finance element. Julie, would you like to just give us a brief overview of where we are, and then we'll follow up with some questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This report sets out the financial position for Q1, although the revenue figures are as at the end of July 2020, as that's the latest information available. So the revenue budget is showing a predicted overspend of just under £700,000, or around 0.49% of the total budget. That's primarily as a result of impacts of the pandemic, in particular reduced income levels. We are expecting imminently the launch of the recovery of lost income scheme from the Home Office. We've been told it will be released in the next few days. That will hopefully should mitigate the predicted forecast significantly. In terms of the capital programme, that's been particularly impacted by the pandemic, with resources being redirected onto other priorities, etc. A number of schemes have been paused or delayed, or the implementation is taking longer as a result of training needing to be social distance, so therefore taking longer, etc. In Q1, the newly formed capital strategy group had a really good look at the budget. In particular, it's recommended that underspends that were predicted were removed from those schemes to enable the offsetting of the saving that was built into the original budget, but also having funding available for new capabilities, etc., that might arise during the year. But also significant slippage was identified. That variance of under £4.2 million is where schemes have slipped. As that's going to be built into the budget for the next financial year, that slippage will be removed, so we're making sure it's not double counted. So there will be an updated revised budget for Q2. That's a very quick high-level summary, but happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And based on your report, and also following up from our discussions at the informal meeting we had in June on the capital programme, that programme is borrowed last year circa 3 million. This year the borrowing is projected to be just under 7 million. And that's an increase based on diminishing capital receipts, i.e. you've sold off what you were going to sell. This borrowing would have been circa 11 million in year, but for the slippage in the programmes which you've just outlined. It really leads to the question, how is the capital programme affordable over time if continued borrowing is required?
Yeah, in February, we started on a journey to ensure that the capital programme is affordable and sustainable over time. And to do that, we need to increase the funding from the revenue budget that's available to support that capital programme each year. Ideally, we need to go from about £1.5 million in the 18-19 budget up to around £4 million a year. And that will mean that the estates, vehicles, IT, kind of routine, regular replacement programme is then funded from an ongoing source. We clearly couldn't do that in 1 year. It wasn't affordable, but we have planned to complete that over the next 5 years. And that will mean that we are then sustainable. That's been built into the programme. The core elements will be funded from revenue, but we will still likely need to look at borrowing for additional schemes in the capital programme, such as the Futures project or the Emergency Services Network Replacement Programme, that will be then financed over a longer time frame.
So I think you've answered my supplementary question, which was going to be, or what is the plan and timeline to get the capital budget balanced? Because you can't keep on borrowing, surely.
No, you're quite right. We were anticipating that the capital programme that we presented to the panel in February will show that by 24-25, the core recommended programme will be funded without relying on borrowing. So by 24-25, we are expecting to have a sustainable capital programme.
So, I mean, that leads into my next question, which one of the PCC's pledges was to ensure that Dorset Police remain debt-free. That is not now the case, is it?
I don't know if, Martin, you want to respond to your commitment.
Yes, sorry, if you can see, I've asked to speak to talk about exactly that. So you're right, Chair, I pledged in 2012 to keep Dorset as a debt-free organisation, but as you know, because you lived this journey with me, so far we've used our own resources to support the borrowing and used internal borrowing and have not taken out any external debt. However, this is going to be required going forward. We've reduced central government grant reducing to almost nothing, limited opportunities for capital receipts, and now we've almost exhausted our capital reserves. Borrowing into the future has become inevitable to ensure Dorset Police retains its ability to keep people safe. I face the same issue that our unitary partners face. You can't keep using reserves, and I'm going to have to borrow. I've maintained the debt-free situation for 8 years, but I am going to have to borrow in the future.
And do you have any estimate how much you will borrow in total, i.e. debt racked up?
That's not an easy question to answer at the moment.
I apologise, it's an unfair question as well.
Well, no, but let me just put it into context. We are looking at our estate at the moment, and decisions on the estate will decide where we go in relation to borrowing and in relation to capital receipts. So it is difficult to answer that question at the moment. I'm not trying to avoid the question, it's just timing is bad.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for that. And I suppose following on, you outlined that you've got this capital expenditure group set up in order to control the 1.2 million underspend from last year. I suppose my concern is that that money is not, well, first question is why is that money not being used to offset the borrowing? And the second point is that that money is not used to procure items that require revenue or future capital costs, if you understand where I'm coming from.
Yes, around half of that underspend has been used to offset the savings that were required as part of the budget, and the remainder is available for new schemes, but they must be supported by a sound business case that either demonstrates revenue savings that cover any borrowing costs, etc., or revenue impact, or demonstrates a really substantial benefit to the public or officers in their work. If there aren't sufficient schemes that require the use of that budget, then it will be used to reduce borrowing during the year. So it has to be supported by a strong business case in order to be approved by the capital strategy group.
Okay, thank you for that. And this is not a question, it's an observation more than anything. The HMIC in the past has commented on the number of reserve lines that Dorset, the OPCC and Dorset Police have. They're now creeping up, so it was pared down to 3. They're now back up to 8 again. You may wish to consider that this may be criticised in the future by the HMIC again. So I'm going to, there's no need to respond to that, just to be aware of it, I think. I think that it would be worthwhile, I've got enough notes on my right-hand side of my screen here, to have a brief 5-minute pause. It's now 11:56. According to my machine here. If I could ask people to reconvene at 12:01, is that okay? I'm sort of looking at the main players here. That will be fine. So 12:01. Could I ask when we have the break that you turn your cameras off and your microphones off, please? And please come back on at 12:01. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Moving on to item 8. This is an item that we've been pursuing, or it's been on the forward work plan, and it's been pushed back a couple of times because of various areas of that were considered more important at the time. We're now going to be looking at serious violence, and the purpose is to consider a report from the PCC on how the OPCC has taken forward the government's serious violence strategy. This strategy was published in April 2018, making significant reference to the contribution required by PCCs in combating this complex issue. The key theme of the strategy is early intervention and prevention, an area the Dorset PCC has long invested in. The aim of this element of the panel's support and scrutiny is: how has the PCC responded to this government direction, and what difference has this made in the area of preventing and resolving incidents of serious violence in Dorset? May I hand over to the PCC? Martin, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So members will see agenda item 8. You have quite a lengthy report written by my Chief Executive, Simon, who's going to lead you through that report. Simon.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair. For the benefit of members of the public watching, I'm Simon Bullock. I'm the Chief Executive to the Police and Crime Commissioner. Chair, if I may, just before I start and get into the substantial matters of the two papers, I'd just like to take a moment just to ensure that members of the public watching are aware of the scope and the remit of the Commissioner's role and responsibility, as potentially seeing agenda items on topics like serious violence and stop and search might potentially lead to expectations of being updated on policing activity, which of course is a matter for the Chief Constable and outside of the Police and Crime Commissioner's remit. So the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, the Police and Crime Commissioner himself, we are a governance body, and our ability is like that of other overview and scrutiny bodies, is one of having some sway over Chief Constable decisions based on an evidence-based viewpoint, but relying on informal powers like negotiation, influence and challenge, rather than having the formal power to compel or mandate his decision-making process. So our avenues of activity are therefore focused around things like gathering evidence and public opinion, horizon scanning for best practice elsewhere across policing, undertaking due diligence on force decisions, and offering views on emerging force policies and strategies. So very much like elected members, we attempt to deliver effective scrutiny and governance through the role of a critical friend. We identify where decisions, policies and strategies might be reasonably and practically improved. We ensure that the view from the public and other partners is given due regard, and we support Dorset Police in its continual development of delivering a better public service. I recognise fully that our outputs are by definition strategic. They are strategies, they are policies, they are decisions, as I've referred to, and it can be a challenge to relate outputs like that back to specific and tangible outcomes. So can we say that a strategy that Dorset Police has delivered, that OPCC has fed into, has led to for example, a percentage improvement in a particular crime type? It's quite difficult to do those kinds of things. But of course, members will be fully aware that quantifying the link between strategy and outcome is a common challenge across all of public policy. But I mentioned this right up front for full transparency, and obviously we'll get into this in the meat of the paper. So Chair, I hope that sets the context for the two papers I'm going to speak to. So I'll get into the matter now. So first of all, serious violence. So serious violence is experienced in very different ways in different areas of the country, but the national policy is very much led by the considerable impacts of the serious violence, very often youth-related violence, which is found in our major metropolitan areas. So the national strategy that Chair's referred to therefore encapsulates issues such as knife crime, gun crime and homicide, and has a very clear focus around ending gang violence and exploitation. This is absolutely necessary. This national focus is very clearly evidence-based. However, Dorset is not subject to these kinds of criminality, and therefore the focus of Dorset Police, the OPCC and our partners, with relation to tackling serious violence has and continues to be around reducing and preventing knife crime. So I'll be clear on this. So you may think that I'll be starting to talk about county lines in here as well, which I'm not going to do. And the reason is that, so county line, just again for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching, county lines is the phenomenon of trafficking illegal drugs from larger metropolitan areas into smaller towns and cities, often by the use of vulnerable children as drugs runners. And that scope of activity is subject to a different Dorset Police strategy. And it must be said that that area of work is largely outside the scope of OPCC, given that the police response is very much quite reactive and doesn't necessarily rely on the need for strong strategy or action planning to determine the kind of local preventative initiatives we're talking about here. So Dorset is an importer of county lines activity, and therefore the preventative work to tackle county lines at source are largely policing matters for other forces, i.e. where the county lines themselves are located, and also for national and other cross-border specialist capabilities, such as the National County Lines Coordinating Centre and the Southwest Regional Organised Crime Unit. So therefore, just a quick context really of why we're focusing this conversation around knife crime. So again, just to then set some context, although I've said that we're going to talk about knife crime, I have to be absolutely clear up front about the extent of this problem locally. So Dorset is and continues to be a safe county. Our incidence of knife crime is very low. In 2019-20, which is the latest available data, there were 35 knife crimes per 100,000 of the population. That compares to 42 knife crimes per 100,000 of the population in the southwest and 84 per 100,000 of the population in England. So of all the forces who provided data for the national data set, there was 41 forces provided data. Dorset ranked 39th. So we are a strong performer in knife crime. I should also say as well that this position has been stable over the last several years. So it's for this reason that OPCC has been very keen to build a preventative model to keep our level of knife crime as low as it has been and to keep it suppressed and prevent it from raising any higher. So Chair, if I may, I'd like to cover two swathes of OPCC activity here. So firstly, our work to develop a public health response to serious violence, and secondly, our work to attempt to secure national funding for Dorset to support this initiative. Members have got the papers. I'll quickly talk through some of the highlights in that. So broadly speaking, as the Chair mentioned, the National Violent Crime Strategy came out in 2018, and as a result, Dorset Police in 2018 began the development of its own knife crime strategy. OPCC, as you would expect, contributed to this early draft, and we suggested that rather than take a singular focus around policing, that it was appropriate to consider a wider partnership approach. The recognition there being that in order to tackle a wicked issue like knife crime, it's much more effective to do so in partnership. It was very clear as well that the public health model, or sometimes called the harm reduction model, which was by then very well established in policing, had been popularised by the work undertaken by the Scotland Violence Reduction Unit. So apologies, I've just noticed that the text in the graphic in 3.2 is gone a little bit awry in how it's been saved. I don't know if it's like that way in members' packs as well. But the public health model, so I should say that top segment is specialist. So the public health model basically takes a population approach, which is a universal approach, so that rather than focusing on at-risk populations, we should instead undertake universal activity to reduce violence inequalities across the entire population. Traditionally, when it comes to delivering policing services, we focus on at-risk or vulnerable populations. The public health model actually says that we should focus on the entire population and undertake ground upwards undertakings around awareness and trying to suppress inequalities across the entire population. The other aspects are around trying to take a preventative focus, so a shift in focus towards upstream risk factors and prevention rather than consequences. Now, it's got to be said that prevention and early intervention is a relatively new concept for policing. Policing is a blue light service. As you all know, that policing does response and reaction incredibly well. What policing hasn't done traditionally well, and I'm talking about policing more broadly as opposed to just Dorset Police, is actually start to think about the upstream risk factors, about prevention ahead of the fact. We are very good at delivering after things have gone wrong, because that's the nature of blue light emergency service. But taking the public health model means that we should switch our focus to be much more in the preventative space. Finally, we should also make sure we take best use of statistics and try and bring in statistics which are from all agencies, so policing obviously, but also public health and more. And obviously, I've talked about the system-wide multi-agency approach as well. So whilst that was the goal, and still remains the goal for OPCC, that we should take a public health approach to tackling knife crime, the drive from policing is very much around the Home Office. And the Home Office sets out what's termed a data requirement, that police forces are required to submit data monthly. And that data is very much focused around the high end of knife crime. So knife possession isn't included in that statistical return. They want to know about the use of knife, the usage of knives. So essentially where violent crimes have taken place. Now, from a Dorset perspective, those are very, very small numbers. So it was recognised that actually in supporting that national agenda, in trying to build up, in supporting the Home Office to build a national picture of crime, of violent crime, actually we were doing Dorset a bit of a disservice because we were excluding knife possession from that data set. So OPCC asked for that data to be included in our local work, and we undertook our own analysis on that data, which is shown in 311. And we found that the demographic of knife crime possession was changing quite rapidly. So you'll see there that we had in 2016 a relatively flat age profile of possession, through to an increase in younger people being found to carry knives in 2017, right the way through to in 2018, almost a half of those in 2018 who were found to carry knives being aged under 24 years or less. And you can see that that changed quite rapidly over that period of time. At the same time as well, there was a number of national campaigns happening. So in particular, the Home Office was pushing a hashtag knife-free campaign, and the imagery and the statistics around that were quite urban and quite gritty. So the imagery in particular was quite gang-related and quite urban, and it didn't really resonate with Dorset or our communities. And so the PCC and the Chief Constable agreed that rather than supporting that national campaign, that we'd do our own work. So that meant that we started to lean on our partners more, and I'm really pleased to report back to members that BCP Community Safety Team really helped us and did a piece of work that really added some value with regards to the health side of the business. And these bits and pieces of analysis were all joined together, and they contributed to the first knife crime strategy, which we delivered last year. So I've listed quite a number of activities that OPCC has undertaken against each one of those drivers in 317. So where we currently are is that we have, in the knife crime strategy currently, a very good understanding of the drivers of knife crime in Dorset. You'll see them listed there. I don't propose to go through them in detail. But again, what we've set out there is the range of OPCC activity under each one of those key drivers. Chair, I mentioned there's also some that Dorset has also struggled to attract national funding. I must admit that I'm fairly disappointed with that. I know the Commissioner shares that view. So I'd rather not go into the details of the sequence of our unsuccessful bids, but they are laid out there for full transparency for members, and happy to take questions about that. But if you'll permit me, then I'll kind of move us on to a conclusion of an overview of where we currently are. So where we currently are is that hopefully you can see that OPCC had a vision for a knife crime strategy and about what we thought it should look like. And you can see the iterations that we've gone through in order to kind of move it towards that position. Currently, the Force and OPCC has a good understanding of our policing data. We have a good understanding of the drivers of knife crime in Dorset, and we have good understanding of what can be done to reduce those. You'll also see that OPCC has directly commissioned and supported a range of initiatives in support of these. Now, moving forward, there are some opportunities, of course, to include other partner data in the Force strategy, particularly public health data. And we are currently working with the Force on the next iteration of the knife crime strategy. And I'm really pleased to report back that it isn't just going to be a knife crime strategy, it's going to be a violent crime strategy. And hopefully it is going to take a public health approach. So that, from our perspective, is a real ambition that we're starting to see fruit born on that. Probably worthwhile saying, though, that our ambition in this space still remains high. Although Dorset, as I've started off by saying, doesn't have a significant problem in this area, we obviously don't want it to become significant. So our ambition remains high, and we do have a plan to create a violence reduction unit in Dorset, as many other Force areas who've been able to benefit from national funding have done so. The note of caution which I've put in the paper is that it may not be possible to deliver a fully fledged violence reduction unit without securing external funding. And so for the moment, our initial focus is on education, awareness raising, around enhancing the offering of knife crime awareness, which is currently provided by the Dorset Police Safe Schools and Communities team. We will be getting into a space, I think, over the remainder of the Commissioner's term, whereby we are hopefully starting to progress towards some small steps towards a violence reduction unit, and obviously happy to keep members informed of that as we go on. But Chair, happy to take any questions. Hopefully that gives members a good overview of our activity to date.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that full briefing on your paper, which I know the panel will have had an opportunity to read in depth. I'm going to run through the matrix. I'm going to ask each individual panel member if they've got any points they'd like to raise. And I'm going to start with May, if I may.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just have one point. Just thank Simon for the report and also Martin. Interested to hear that it's been decided that they would take the public health approach, which is basically to target the whole population as opposed to targeting certain sectors or certain areas, because that's where it's known to have more violent crime. Just wondering what the Commissioner's view is on that, whether that is actually a more effective way of doing it, because the way I'm looking at it, if you're not doing a specific target, but you're doing an entire population approach, is that not in a way diluting the efforts and diluting the already limited resources within the police?
Thanks for that, May. No, I don't think it is. The public health approach is a very well tried and tested approach that started in Glasgow and Cardiff, and over the last decade has been recognised as best practice. As long as you make knife crime a police issue, it's never going to go away, because it's too late. By the time a police officer is stopping a kid with a knife in his pocket, whether that's to self-harm, protect himself, or stab someone else, because there are 3 reasons for carrying a knife, don't forget, it's too late. The public health approach is all about, it isn't, although Simon used the word whole population, I think he's just trying to demonstrate that you start off with a funnel with everybody in it, and then with other partners, you take that funnel down into different layers. And those layers, over a 4 to 5 year period, have been shown time and time again, particularly in Glasgow, which had the worst knife crime problem in the whole of the United Kingdom, to reduce knife crime by 80%. So I do support the public health approach. That's where the VRU, Violence Reduction Unit concept comes from. I'm just a bit, as Simon's already alluded to and the report alludes to, pretty devastated actually. We put more work into getting funding in this space than probably anything else I've done in 8 years as a PCC, and I can't get the funding, which I find very frustrating. But I hope that answers the question.
May?
Yep, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ian?
Nothing from me.
Thank you very much. Tony?
Yeah, could local authorities perhaps do more with the big picture in being sort of consistent in their provision, for example, of facilities for young people? I know that there's been an attempt to maintain youth facilities, and of course the recent months have kind of knocked that out a little bit, although there has still been some outreach work. But is actually making sure that these attempts are being backed up by local authorities engaging with young people and working with young people, is that the best way forward? You know, sort of partnership working, taking the whole person approach, because knife crime starts somewhere. It might start with a mental health issue, but it also starts with youngsters falling prey to county lines and getting involved in bravado sort of behaviour rather than constructive behaviour. And I'm probably sounding a bit vague, but is there perhaps a bit more partnership working that can be done in that area?
So I'll always default to Simon if he wants to give a view. Simon, you wrote the report, so please just indicate if you want to come in. But from my point of view, to use your words, knife crime starts in people's heads. It's an attitude. People decide to carry a knife normally to protect themselves rather than to attack other people. That then morphs into street awareness, street gangs, and then they use it to stab other people. So to me, actually, and Simon's already said this, public health is the key partner, far more for me than the local authority. If you use health and local authority, because they are still a key partner, and policing to influence children 7, 8, 9 years old, you change a generation's attitude to knife crime. So it's a good question, Tony. I am frustrated, actually, I have to say, because one of our local authorities opened up spaces to youth very quickly and the other didn't. BCP's literally just opened up premises to youth, which I've been very frustrated with and have written to the council about, because the longer you fail to engage with youth, the more problems you're going to have. So I find it quite frustrating from my point of view that the two local unitaries have had different approaches to reopening their public spaces and their community centres. But that said, any work in this area from local authority or charity work can only be to the better, but it has to be joined up with health. Simon.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I think I agree with the question. Actually, I think the panel members will recall that I think it probably would have been back in March, maybe. No, it would have been earlier than that. Maybe it was I think last November, and then back in February we discussed youth offending more broadly and the support that we hope might be given in that space. The conversation we had, and very happy to circulate, potentially recirculate those papers to new panel members. I think it'd be useful just to articulate the Commissioner's views on that space, but broadly speaking, we were exactly supportive of the view that's been suggested.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you want anything to follow up with, Tony?
No, I think, you know, I've been very aware of the frustration at not getting youth spaces open up, but there has been some confusion with COVID regulations and so on. And one that I've been directly involved with as a chairman of trustees did open up just a week before the rule of 6 came in. But fortunately, we found out in time that the rule of 6 didn't apply to youth gatherings, but there was some confusion then that sort of caused people to sort of step back from plans to reopen facilities. So so I kind of welcome the comments that others have done it, and that it would be helpful if facilities were opened up.
Thank you very much for that, Tony. I'm sure that work will be progressed by the PCC. Lisa? No? Peter?
I haven't got any questions at the moment, but it's just an observation from somebody who's very new to all of this. The talk of prevention and the trouble with actually funding prevention to a significant extent. Perhaps we could explore this later at the next meeting or thereafter. Are health, fire, the unitary councils, the voluntary sector, the police, the OPCC, do you think that you're currently getting the full benefit from working what you could do if you all got together and worked collaboratively in a really effective way on this issue? Is there further scope for getting improvements going forward if everybody worked together better?
I think there's always scope for that. I'm going to ask Simon to come in.
I feel like the chair is itching to talk about the Dorset Joint Effects Board as well. I think the view is well put, and I think fundamentally it's difficult. So I've outlined from a policing perspective the difference between reactive and proactive, and I think from a policing perspective, which is really the only perspective I'm qualified to make an address on, I can understand that, because actually the police is set up to be a reactive service. As we've moved into a different space now, so the police now is starting to move away from traditional crime into vulnerability, starting to move into prevention, starting to move into early intervention. It's right and proper it does that, but it's still got some expertise to build up in that area. And fundamentally and ultimately, the police will still respond to 999 and 101 calls, and that is their core business. When it comes to partners, the difficulty is that you'll forgive me, but I think sometimes it's the difference in national agendas. So government will hand down different national agendas to policing, to public health, to local authorities, and those statutory responsibilities aren't always, I should say, as aligned as you would want them to be. And sometimes there can be gaps in between, and sometimes the nature of the way those statutory responsibilities are handed down to individual local agencies to deliver means that it is quite complex to actually work together. So sometimes we're fighting against our statutory responsibilities locally. It would be, we do as good a job as we can in trying to join up locally, but we're always fighting against those national agendas. And obviously sometimes those things change over time as well. I can only again speak for policing, but we're subject to, so we've talked a lot today about the COVID regulations. I've frankly lost count of how many COVID regulations there have been since March, and we're getting announcements, and we're still not quite understanding what the police responsibility is around policing those requirements, and that's a constant position. And I'm sure council members will be thinking that's exactly the same for local authorities, and I'm sure it's the same for public health. And those kinds of things do make it difficult. We absolutely try our best. It is a challenge. We'd all want to do more, as the Commissioner says.
Thank you for that, Simon, and you were spot on. I was bouncing up and down, but we'll discuss that more in the future. And Peter's not aware of the Dorset Joint Effects Board at the moment. I've yet to initiate him into the delights of that, of my aspirations. Anyway, moving swiftly on, Bobby.
Yes, thank you. I have concerns around 3.13. Now, this is either a really, really amazingly brave decision, for which I applaud you, but I just want to be reassured that this decision was not made in a white magnolia painted room by a group of white males in Middle England and deciding what it is our youth require And I'd like some assurances that we actually did test the market before making this decision, that we absolutely understood by asking and engaging with young people, and not just young people that are within our schools, but the actual cohort we're aiming this programme at, as to what it was they wanted to see and how they measured that effectiveness.
Yeah, happy to cover that one off. I think I don't want to criticise a national campaign, but the Knife Free campaign, part of the thing that I remember mostly about it was that the Home Office paid quite a large sum of money for hashtag knife free messages to be printed on chicken boxes, so chicken and chips boxes, and some of the imagery around the awareness raising again was very much around the impact of being stabbed, the sentencing around being stabbed, and actually from a Dorset perspective, the issue is around possession of knife, not a use of knife. And actually, possession of knife is actually a lower offence, and the Home Office, with regard to their national prioritisation, that doesn't fit in that matrix, because the issue is around nationally, the issue is around uses of knives, which I'm sure we've all seen in national media. In terms of addressing the question specifically, so the Dorset Police Safer Schools and Community team engage with young people across Dorset every week. And so we took into account exactly the feedback that you're suggesting. So that came through that engagement and was moved into the Chief Constable and the PCC's decision-making process.
Okay.
So I think, yes, so I think Martin wants to come in.
Martin, do you want to come in?
Yeah, please. I just want to add to what Simon said, because Bobby, I don't know if you know, but in 2012, 13, 14, I was a trustee and a founding member of Turn Your Back, which was Dorset's first ever knife charity. I created that charity with Jane Ormerod, whose son Nick was stabbed to death in Boscombe. The reason I mention that is that while we were running as a charity, we explored in great detail with the cohort you're talking about in the conurbation about whether you did what we called shock treatment, which is what they do and still do in Hampshire, which is where you were going to schools. I know I had a provider who would go into schools and show the impact of stabbing, the images of stabbing, and use the shock treatment approach. And as a charity, we realised very quickly we were pitching it at the wrong level, and Simon's absolutely right. We have a less knife problem in this county than most places in this country. And so I had that in my head at the time we made that decision as well. You know, I have got learned experience from running a knife charity. So I think we made the right decision, and I appreciate your words, actually. You said that you admire us for making it. It was a bold move because the Home Office were not happy. But there you are.
No, my second point was going to be around education, and you covered it beautifully, because I was really concerned we were going in too late, going into secondaries. The fact that you've mentioned Key Stage 2 ages is brilliant, and thank you, and for that I do applaud you.
Thank you for that, Bobby. Good challenge on the first question there. George.
Thank you. I don't have a question as such, other than having spent some of my life in Glasgow with the street crime, particularly knife crime around there, then these learned experiences are incredibly valuable. And I just wanted to say thank you to the office of the PCC in that reaching out to where it has worked before to what actually fits the situation that we have in our own rural location and adapting it appropriately so we're getting the results. And it's a very interesting discussion to be involved in, particularly when we talk about our neighbouring local authorities in Hampshire that are still using shock tactics, perhaps too late to actually change the mindset of why it is that somebody carries a knife. I'm very pleased that the work is continuing in the way that it is, and I echo Bobby's comments. Is that a very brave decision to adapt appropriate to the residents of Dorset and the population of Dorset, as opposed to just following the blanket model of, you know, put a shocking picture on a chicken box. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, George. Les?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Simon. Simon, thank you for your very detailed report, which I wholeheartedly agree and support with. I like the bold decision on 313. I think that was the right move to make. With my experience in Dorset and contacts, I know there is, as such, not a nice problem, but I think by engaging with the whole community, making the whole community responsible and bringing them in to deal with it, the granny, uncles, aunts, siblings, will have a far better response and keep Dorset a safer place. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Les. Bill?
No question as such, but I just want reassurance really that both local authorities are working closely with the what used to be the Community Safety Partnership and are getting along nicely together.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Something that you've attended yourself, Martin, but perhaps Simon could give us that a reassurance.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe so, Councillor Pipe. Our head of policy, Jason Munford, attends both community safety partnerships, and I know that Dorset Police also attended to senior level. So yeah, we are content. I think always difficulties, always opportunities for improvement as well. But yeah, we are content with how things are developing thus far.
Yeah, I don't know if you're aware that the composition of that body now is one member from each authority, so we don't have 3 or 4 councillors attending these anymore. It's just down to the portfolio holders. I'm sure you knew that anyway.
That's right. Yeah, we were aware.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. I'll come back to you in a minute, Les. David Taylor.
Yeah, thanks for bringing me in. I'd like to say thank you for an excellent report, Simon and Martin. It really is good news to see that we're really on top of things and judge it. But one thing I'm looking at would be positive for us, so I'll put my camera on, is the fact of changing a report in another way to say the success stories we've had regarding county lines of knife crime, etc. Could it be viewed so that, I know bad news sells stories and newspapers and this, but could there be a good news sells in the newspapers instead, where the success story of all of PCC and police force has been good news and actually making us county safer and being shouted out a bit louder? Thank you.
I think that's a really good approach, and I will quite happily hold up our hands and say that we don't often celebrate the success as much as we should do. Martin and I are aware of quite a recent case of a young person carrying a knife, and actually transpires for very, very different reasons. That individual was safeguarded, and you know, it's cases like that potentially we should be made aware. I think that's a really good opportunity. Actually, I'll see if we can feed that back through the Safer Schools Communities team to make sure that those success stories and those potential case studies are fed back directly to young people who may actually be carrying knives. So I think that's a useful thing. Thank you for that.
No worries. It's just it is an opportunity I use as often as possible when I get a success story, not a negative story, so that we say you're actually doing well, and instead of this background to it. Anyway, thank you very much for taking my question.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. Thanks for the support into the OPCC there. Much appreciated. Les, finally.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just wonder, it's disappointing to hear the Commissioner's response in relation to the funding applications. And I just wonder whether through you as the Chair, you two can have a conversation and maybe an appropriate letter worded off asking or inviting our support for funding along the lines. But I'll leave that for you to consider, please.
That's very prescient of you, actually, Les. Because one of the questions I was going to ask, you outlined, Martin, Simon, that your disappointment in the inability to secure any national funding, and I understand the reasons why from a national level. You know, they look at Dorset and think that arguably they think we don't need it, but you could argue that we do need it. my question really is, how did you conduct any lobbying of local MPs in order to provide leverage in these Dorset bids for the Home Office or the MOJ or wherever they went?
So what we did a number of different things. So it wasn't so you'll notice that OPCC produced an alternative methodology which looked at the rate of incidents rather than the volume of incidents, because from our perspective there is a difficulty in the way that the money is currently apportioned, because smaller forces, by the nature of the fact they haven't had many cases of knife violence, are actually disproportionately undervalued. And it was the larger forces that actually received the funding. Now, I mentioned in the paper that even on the new methodology that OPCC proposed to the Home Office, Dorset still wouldn't have achieved funding, but it would have been a more fairer funding model. So where we currently are is that we have lobbied Home Office on this. Martin's had conversations when the opportunity arises. We've also made it available. So I've gone back to the APCC Lead for Serious Violence on this one, tried to raise it back through Chief Constable channels, and we've also had the opportunities to talk about the funding model through APCC colleagues as well, so through Police and Crime Commissioner colleagues and our officers. The difficulty is, and this is the case for all police funding, unfortunately, anytime there's competed funding or there's funding according to a set of criteria, there are winners and there are losers. And generally speaking, I'll say it's the larger forces who benefit and it's the smaller forces who don't. And, we can make that argument often, and we do, and Martin will do it on a frequent basis, any opportunity he gets. I'll do it through my forums. Julie will do it through her forums as our CFO as well. The difficulty is going to be that ultimately we are a relatively small voice. And whilst I really appreciate, and I'm not saying we won't do it, I'm just being pragmatic here. We got a really strong view back from the Home Office to say that we're not going to change their methodology. I'm happy to go back in and lobby them again, but there's no way that's going to change.
I suppose my question is, did you seek the support of local MPs?
We tried, but I mean, we did, and we raised it through them. So at the time, I think I don't want to highlight particular members, particular parliamentarians, but one of our parliamentarians was tied into the Home Office at the time, and he raised it directly.
Yeah, you've answered the question. You did approach local MPs at the end of the day. Yeah, thank you for that. One of the constant themes throughout the paper is that Dorset does not have, in relation to others, and we've just been discussing this, areas in the country, a serious violence issue. Is that what you're really saying?
Correct. Yeah.
So I suppose the follow-on question that is why are we seeking a violence reduction unit?
Because we want to keep it that way. So unfortunately, what we've got is that I have the benefit of being working closely with another force previous to my time in Dorset, and I'm getting misty-eyed now potentially. But I remember Bedfordshire is where I moved from before I came into Dorset. Bedfordshire currently has the 5th highest level of knife crime in the country. Bedfordshire is a very small force, comparable in size to Dorset. Now that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case going back 20 years. I'm not sure it was the case going back 15 years, in all honesty. And so I don't want Dorset to fall into a trap of saying we don't have a problem, let's not do anything about it. From my perspective, and I'm sorry if I come across a bit bolshy on this one, but I think this is the perfect time for us to put a strong process in place to make sure that we never get to that position. You don't want to bolt the stable door after the horse is gone. And from my perspective, prevention is exactly we've got a really good opportunity now, low crime levels. Let's get into that prevention space and let's push that as hard as we can to make sure violent crime never takes off in Dorset. So yeah, it is the right thing to do. Is the short answer there, Chair?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I dropped out, so I do apologise. Yeah, you've answered the question. It's a layman's question, really. And you very succinctly answered the question, so I appreciate that. Right, I think I need to hand over to Mark Eyre for an announcement. Mark, do you want to do what you've got to do?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to see, it looks like the meeting's going to exceed 3 hours. Under the Constitution, if that's the case, we just need to vote as to whether to continue the meeting, and if so, to set a reasonable time period for us to complete that meeting, or whether to adjourn. So I was just really probably to invite you as Chair to seek a proposer and seconder for continuing for, I guess, a time of what you think reasonable, but perhaps I'd suggest a maximum of an hour.
Yep, thank you for that. May I have a proposer, please?
I'll propose that. David Taylor.
Seconder.
Happy to second, Chair. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you. All those in favour? Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, Mark.
So yes. I think as long as nobody wants to propose adjourning and that's seconded, I think that can be agreed.
Yeah. I can't hear any noises of dissent, so we will progress. But thank you for that point of order, Mark. Bill.
Yeah, just you may have noticed in the chat, Bob, I have another meeting at 1:30, so I will need to leave this by 1:25 at the latest.
Thanks very much, Bill. And on that note, thank you very much for the excellent briefing on item 8, serious violence. I really appreciate the work that's gone into that piece of work from Simon, which moves us now on to item 9, stop and search. As a bit of an introduction, stop and search is an operational policing mandate, and the use and management of this policy for the county, based on the current legislation, lies with the Chief Constable. A government report highlighted that a government report in this year highlighted that black people are 25 times more likely to be stopped and searched by police in Dorset than white people. The issue of this stop and search in our county was raised as a concern to the PCP by Mr. David Sidwick. His question was driven by recent reports in the media. We as a panel, we endorse that stop and search policy rests with the Chief Constable. However, one of the key roles of the Police and Crime Commissioner is to act as a conduit and the electorate. Hence, our key lines of inquiry are aimed at seeking assurance that the PCC is holding the Chief Constable to account over Dorset Police's use of stop and search. I'm going to stop there and hand over to Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Good introduction from the Chair. Thank you for that. And we have responded to that challenge, if you like, with a report written by Simon. You'll see why Simon wrote the report as he leads you through it. Simon's very active in this space, as am I. I'm going to let Simon introduce the report and then we'll go for questions. But be under no illusions, this is the Achilles heel of Dorset Police and has been since I've been Police Crime Commissioner. But let's hear the context and then we'll have the discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair. So, Chair, as you've outlined that Dorset Police has been the national outlier for stop and search disproportionality against black people for well over a decade. Now, bearing in mind that's quite a difficult opening statement, I just wanted to come right up front and place on record our view and also address the potential elephant in the room. So, firstly, Police and Crime Commissioner and the OPCC are very discontent with that position. Secondly, critics may say that because a police force is not able to articulate the reasons for its disproportionality, then the only possible explanation must be that it is institutionally racist. Now, from an OPCC and the Police and Crime Commissioner perspective, nothing that we have seen in our scrutiny leads us to agree with that position. I think we both, as a panel and as a Police and Crime Commissioner Office, would recognise that the outcomes of BAME individuals at a national level with regards to policing and the wider criminal justice system are well established. We could go through those, and I could speak for hours on this, but I'm not going to. But right the way through from 1981 Scarman reports through 1999 McPherson reports into the Lamy Review and the Race Disparity Audit, both published in 2017, the current global racial injustices highlighted by the Black Lives Matter movement, it is absolutely clear and absolutely concrete that BAME individuals have experienced and continue to experience disproportionate outcomes. Here in Dorset, we've already heard that black people are stopped at a significantly higher level than white people. It's important to just explain that just a little bit. I don't want to get into statistics, but it's important to just explain that, because sometimes people may think, oh, well, is that because black people are more disproportionately carrying out crime? But actually, what we find in Dorset is that the find rate, which is the number of times that the police officers find the object they're searching for, is higher for white people than it is for black people. So officers stop search an individual because of a particular reason. So, they may think they have a strong grounds for a drug search, for example. More commonly, the item searched for is found on white people than black people. Black people are also more likely to be arrested in Dorset. 1 in 10 white individuals are arrested versus 1 in 5 black individuals. These are our facts. So the Police and Crime Commission has called for an explanation into these facts, but as yet has yet to receive an adequate response. So it's really important from our perspective that we fill in that absence of evidence. We close that gap as soon as we possibly can. So where we are is that we've already talked about a 25-to-1 disproportionality rate. Dorset has been by far the national outlier for a number of years now, for almost pushing 15 years, broadly speaking, since contemporary records are available. This compares to a national average of 8-to-1. So we are quite an outlier. Also worth saying that within Dorset, as with the national picture, the disproportionality rate for Asian and for other ethnic minorities is far lower and is actually in line with national averages. So the Commissioner has been acutely aware of this position since he was elected and has been working with the force to try and understand the reasons for this disproportionality. It's probably fair to say that in recent years, some of the detail that's been forthcoming has not been immediate. And as a result of this, and as a result of the continual lack of explanation around this disproportionality, the Police and Crime Commissioner issued a formal challenge to the Chief Constable at the beginning of 2018 to set out his requirement for a satisfactory explanation. And to support this challenge and his scrutiny of the force, he also commissioned an independent review of the Dorset Police stop and search data, processes and procedures. Those findings and those recommendations were issued to the force in November of 2018. It was hoped then, as we move into 2019, that would start to lead to an improvement in position, but unfortunately Dorset Police's position worsened. So we were at 17-to-1 in 2017-18, and then that moved to 25-to-1 in 18-19. It has improved since then. We're currently at about 22.5-to-1 for 19-20, but still quite significantly an outlier. Chair, that's the kind of background. I'll quickly cover off 3 main areas of PCC activity, if I may, and then also public engagement, which I'll mention separately. So the first area is our Stop and Search Independent Scrutiny Panel. Members are well aware that the PCC will manage a small number of independent scrutiny panels, which also include representation from members of the public and in some instances Police and Crime Panel members. With regards to the Stop and Search Panel, that considers the context of stop and search, so national guidance, learning from other forces, any learning from national high-profile cases. It also looks at the Dorset Police quarterly performance data and that gets into a whole raft of data around disproportionality statistics, objects of search, as I mentioned, find rates, the age, the ethnicity, the location, the legal power. And for full transparency, those data sets are available and downloadable on the Dorset Police website. There is a link in the paper there for members who want, and members of the public who want to go off and find that. And the third thing that the panel does, it also undertakes a random dip sampling of stop search cases. So the panel will set criteria every quarter to say, can we have a look at young people, can we have a look at drug stops, can we have a look at whatever they particularly want to look at. And Dorset Police will pick a random sample of cases for us to scrutinise. So we get, traditionally we've got a redacted version of the force crime report, but over the last year or so we've actually been able to introduce the panel members on that being able to watch the body-worn video footage of officers on scene undertaking the stop and search, which has been really useful. So the panel raises any concerns, any challenges and any successes to the Police and Crime Commissioner to support him in his scrutiny of the Chief Constable. Broadly speaking, the panel are supportive and have been supportive of the actions undertaken by officers, and no major concerns with Dorset Police's operations has been highlighted in the several years the panel has been running, albeit, of course, they've noted the disproportionality ratio with disappointment. Secondly, I've touched on it earlier, Chair, but I just wanted to mention the independent review that was commissioned by the Police and Crime Commissioner. So this was undertaken by a former Dorset officer, as it happens, but who left the force some 10 years previously and had spent the last decade of his career within Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Constabulary, also looking at stop and search among one of his portfolios. So the review was fully supported by the Chief Constable, and Dorset Police provided full access and full cooperation. The outcome of that review was that over a dozen recommendations were made, all of which were accepted by the force and which are currently included in the stop and search improvement plan, a bit more of which I'll talk about later. The findings of the review were also shared with the stop and search panel and with wider community members through the Dorset Race Equality Council, both of whom, the Stop and Search panel and the Dorset Race Equality Council membership, received those findings positively and fed back positively on the findings. Thirdly, then, Chair, is the Police and Crime Commissioner's challenge, and I've mentioned this a few times now. So, as the Commissioner mentioned, we have been particularly and unusually intrusive in this area. Stop and search is the only area whereby the Police and Crime Commissioner has ever issued a second challenge. And the second challenge, again, it's fair to say, unusually took the exceptional position of making specific recommendations, which is something that we've never done previously. So important to say here then that the reason why we got to that position is because we were a little bit frustrated with the feedback from the force, which tended to be, in the first instance, relatively defensive about their current position. We've now moved that forward, and actually what we're seeing now is that the Chief Constable's response to the latest challenge has been considerable and has been really pleasing to see, and I'm sure the Commissioner will expand on this and give you his personal view. But from an OPCC perspective, it's really the first time that we've seen the kind of leadership on this issue that we've been hoping for. So in the paper, I think it's at 420, we've summarised the key improvements that have been proposed there. But just to pull off a couple there, so the Chief Constable asked for the Dorset Police executive team to take on shared responsibility for stop and search. And this includes having it as a standing item on their weekly executive meeting, and also including stop and search improvement as a PDR objective for every chief officer. Secondly, we've also now established a stop and search board, which is chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable, and that has senior representation across both the force and the OPCC. And this is an internal board that's going to consider the wider possible impacts across the organisation of the delivery of our stop and search policies and procedures, and will also address the specific issues that are raised by the PCC. Joe mentioned I'd pick up public engagement separately. And although the Commissioner engages with the public on a frequent basis, both face-to-face in different circumstances and online, it's fair to say that stop and search has never been raised as an issue that the public have got strong views on. This is also reflected in the very low levels of media interest that we've received, despite a number of proactive releases from Dorset Police and the Commissioner in this space. Finally, that the number of complaints received by Dorset Police in relation to stop and search is also very low. It averages about 5 complaints per year in each of the last 5 years. So very low levels of complaints then. So finally, Chair, just to round off then, just to provide members with the latest position. So the latest position really is that obviously both the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable continue to treat stop and search disproportionality as a priority improvement area. From an OPCC perspective, our main activity is around the Dorset Police Stop and Search Board. There's been 2 meetings so far. At the last meeting, it was agreed that its terms of reference should be extended beyond stop and search, and that board should start to consider potential disproportionality across all aspects of policing within Dorset, and therefore should be reformed as a disproportionality board. The current steps of activity around that board are listed at 5.2, but there's also a tactical group that sits underneath that, which looks at the operational delivery of stop and search within Dorset. And although that's operational, OPCC does maintain some links into that board as well. I'll appreciate the members will probably, of course, want to know a little bit more about the outcomes of this work. And I'll kind of start by saying that the improvement plan that exists is owned by the Chief Constable. It's not owned by us, but it does consist of around 40 separate actions, as I say, a good dozen of which are directly taken from, well, probably a bit more than that actually, probably pushing 20 actions are taken directly from OPCC's review. And the outcome of this action plan is to better understand and to reduce disproportionality. They're also to improve the transparency of the way stop and search is used in Dorset, and thereby hopefully improving community insurance and aiding in police legitimacy. From an OPCC perspective, the Commissioner continues to press for further action quite strongly and continues to offer significant challenge to Dorset Police Chief Officers. Chair, I'll leave it there, and again, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that, Simon, for the briefing on your paper and outlining some of the more areas where you think you're getting some traction. But my comment when I read the paper is that there's an air of frustration in your paper all the way through. Would you agree? Would you agree to that?
I would, and I'd probably bring in the Commissioner at this point. I think from our perspective, this has been a challenge. You will get a sense there that we are really trying hard on this one. But the frustration, I think, is that we don't know the answers. When I say we, it's Dorset, we don't know the answers. So that is quite difficult. It's not an easy solvable problem, and Dorset Police is currently undertaking a range of activity to see if we can get the answer to those. But it has gone on for quite some time. But I'll bring in the Commissioner, if I may.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, Chair, I would just like to sum up after that excellent report from Simon. It is a very difficult area for us because this has gone on a long time, and you're right. You correctly sense frustration from myself and my team. 3 things from me. One, I think we have to keep this in perspective. We have scrutinised 3 areas of policing in detail recently. 2 of those the panel know about. So the first is stop and search, the second is the issuing of COVID tickets, and the third is the use of taser deployment or red dotting. And the force is not disproportionate at all, excuse me, in relation to the use of taser or the issuing of tickets in COVID. And I think we just need to bear that in mind. Which leads me to, which I don't think Simon said, but I'm fully expecting the question, so I will say it. my investigations, Simon's investigations over several years has led us both to believe that the force are not institutionally racist. That's an important point to make. Am I happy with where we are? No, I'm not. Am I frustrated? Yes, I am. Why do I think it's happening? I think for several years, this force has spent too much time, and then Simon touches on this in his report, and I said this quite frankly in my letter to the Chief Constable, this force has spent too many years defending statistics rather than actually examining its tactics. Do I think that the stop and search is the right tactic being used at the moment in Dorset in relation to the prevention of drug dealing? No, I don't. And actually, interestingly, since I wrote the letter, since Simon and I told the force that we wanted to see an examination of their tactics rather than defence of their statistics, I noticed that the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister have now both, and Cressida Dick actually, the Commissioner of the Met, have all challenged the concept that stop search is a legal and lawful tactic for most police activity. So until we can get the policing nationally and policing locally to examine why it does something, which actually frankly doesn't work, and Simon's report adequately shows that, we're never going to break this circle, which leaves Dorset as the highest, most disproportionate force in relation to stop search. So I just want to put those things into the mix. So some of which Simon's already said already, but I'm just backing him up and saying I support his position. And I would like to thank Simon. He spent literally hundreds of hours agitating in this space on my behalf, and we are both very frustrated. We shouldn't be here after 8 years. This is unacceptable to me. And I've made it quite clear to the Chief Constable and to the Deputy Chief Constable who's about to arrive that we will not be the most disproportionate police force in 2021. That will be completely and utterly unacceptable. And they have got, as Simon's already alluded to, in 420, all of them have it in their PDR, which for the members of the public is their personal development review, their one-to-ones with their line manager, that they must break that cycle. We have to break that figure. It's not acceptable.
I think possibly we might have lost the chair. Mike.
Yeah.
Have we lost Mike?
He's frozen.
Might have done.
Oh, sorry. Did you all get my bit?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
fine.
We did. Yeah.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry about that. Problems of living in the middle of nowhere. Thank you very much, Martin, for your and Simon for the briefing, as I said earlier on. I have got some other points, but I don't want to hog the limelight. Bill, I know you've got a cutaway. I'll offer the floor to you first.
That's very kind of you. I've listened very carefully to what both Martin and Simon have said. You know, racism in any form is an abhorrent thing, but if a particular race or colour is likely to commit specific crimes and we don't stop and search them and they carry out these crimes, then I think we're doing it wrong. I know that we're the worst force in Dorset for this, but it doesn't take away from the fact that certain races are more likely in Dorset to commit these crimes. And I'm not a racist in any way. I'm probably the only one around this table, this virtual table, that actually actively supports Africans in Africa. I run 2 schools out there and it costs me thousands of pounds a year. So I'd challenge anybody to call me a racist, but they probably will. I think we need to use stop and search to be able to stop and search those people who we consider to be those that are more likely to commit a specific crime, particularly when we're talking about county lines and we're talking about drug dealing and perhaps knife crime.
Yeah, sorry, can I interrupt? The Lammy report absolutely is categorical. There is no particular race linked to any kind of crime. I'd like to detach myself and remove myself from any comments made by Councillor Pipe at this point, please.
Thank you.
I have nothing else to say.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Lisa.
Sorry, can I just come in for the record then? So I think I support Councillor Dove's view on that, and I'll just reiterate, just for the record, the statistics that I gave at the beginning of the presentation. So Dorset Police stops 25 times more likely to stop black people than white people. However, the find rate is higher for white people than black people. So when Dorset Police stops white people and black people, it finds the objects of the search more often on white people than it does on black people. Those are the facts. Those are absolutely the facts, and we've seen that through a number of years. Unfortunately, again, then the facts demonstrate that black people are more likely to be arrested than white people. So 1 in 10 white people are arrested versus 1 in 5 black people are arrested. Now, I make no comment whatsoever on those, but those are the facts for Dorset. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Simon. And the purpose of this item on the agenda is to see what the OPCC has been doing about it, which you quite eloquently outlined, both you and the Commissioner just now. So I'd like to invite Lisa, if you've got any points you'd like to make, questions.
I just absolutely support what Bobby Dove just said as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony?
Yeah, I take entirely the last point, and you know, I think stop and search has its value, but it's obviously not being done right. There's a lot of assumptions in how it's applied. If you've got you know, sort of the 100% difference in what is found on people, so there does seem to be an issue with its implication, and that assumptions are being used in it. But I'm one of those people who kind of feels that county lines is a really important thing, and we need to get it right. And if stop and search helps, but the fact that there does seem to be some kind of racial profiling in targeting the stop and search does worry me, you know, because it sounds as if the statistics very plainly say that there isn't, and that so there are assumptions at work here. So you know, I think that the application of stop and search and how it's targeted needs to be looked at very carefully. But I wouldn't want to I've never been involved in operational policing or anything like that, so I don't know the value of stop and search, but I wouldn't want to lose that to the armoury. But I think it has to be applied in a way that doesn't make assumptions about people. And I know that you know, members of the public, when they speak about issues and suspicious people and things like that, do tend to racially profile, and it does seem to be that is reflected in some of the police operations.
Okay, thank you for that. Martin?
Thank you, Chair. I have to come in support of Councillor Dove and Simon. I was pretty shocked to hear that comment. At the end of the day, that's exactly the issue we've had for the last 8 years, that the misconception that all of the drug dealing in Dorset is being dealt with by blacks. And Simon has rebutted that very strongly and very well. But just to add to that, all of us will remember, because it was the most successful police operation ever carried out, Operation Phonetic, which came to a head 8 weeks ago, biggest and most significant operation in its kind ever in England, where the NCA took out 746 people and recovered over £56 million in cash. A handful, less than 10 of those people were black. And hopefully that will make some people reflect soberly on what was just said.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Martin. Moving on to David Taylor.
Yeah, thank you for this excellent report. Very, very in depth. I can see it. The thing I'm saying, as I mentioned my comment before, is the fact the positive aspects. If you just quoted the figures of the white people are more likely to do. You found more white people doing the problems than black. Is a thing that I never knew before. So therefore, it's the fact is if it was publicly recorded or sent out as a good news story, because at the end of the day, it is a good news story, and they come there. As I mentioned with other things, so might be worth cascading the stories, as I say, or the facts, down to parish council, town council, Dorset council, so they were all on the vision of what's going on, and therefore we can actually step in to achieve. And also the fact that publishing positive reports means the fact is that the good out of it comes, that the people can actually reporting on good things happening within their communities. So it's the other way around, which I think it needs to be looked at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, David. Ian.
Sorry about that, very slow with my fingers there, sorry about that. The first thing is it's just a little point for if there are members of the public listening, that the PCC places the scrutiny panel minutes on his website. I appreciate the last one was the 3rd of March, but that's because the June one was cancelled and obviously September to come. But I do think, unless I missed it, I think that's a valid point to make, that members of the public can see what that scrutiny panel does by going to those minutes, which are easily findable on the PCC's website. So that's my first thing. The second one is that the bottom line is things have got to be decided based on evidence. So one of the key things that I see in the recommendations is the proposal to appoint a academic who is an expert in this field. So the question is, when is that going to happen? And I assume the PCC would fund all that. That's my question, really.
Yeah, should I do that one? So it's actually so this action plan is Chief Constable owned. So it's actually the actions taken are for the Chief Constable. I'm just mindful that we've got lurking in the wings Chief Superintendent Steve Lyne, who's the head of corporate development, who's also taking the lead on the action plan for the force. And I'd like to bring him in, if I may, just to answer particularly where we are on that academic work. But also, I'm sure he'd want to demonstrate that the force is taking this seriously as well, and are committed to improving. Is that okay, Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Can everyone see me? Is the camera working? Yep. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. So firstly, we as a force would just like to say thank you to the OPCC for the scrutiny that they've put in. We are not comfortable with the position that the force finds itself in, and we are committed to reducing disproportionality. So I'm the strategic lead that sits underneath the executive to start delivering the plan that's been outlined by Simon. So I'm not going to go into all the detail of what that plan looks like. But in regard to the academic side, that's already been commissioned. In fact, after this meeting, I'm meeting the professor that's leading that to take the work forward. This isn't going to be an evidence-based piece that will take years to deliver on. We recognise that we need to be making some actions and moving on this in the very short term. We've also been liaising with the HMIC around what other learning there is out there. And just to demonstrate how important we recognise this and the transparency, in due course, we will be publishing the plan, the work and any academic side to it, just to demonstrate the progress we've made against this and our commitment to make an impact.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. Do you want to respond at all, Ian?
I'm going to have to get quicker on these buttons, aren't I? Yeah, I mean, I just say that we should note that in terms of an action, we would expect to see that academic work and the actions that come out of it at a future meeting. And again, most probably picking up the point that the Commissioner made earlier, this will take some time, and we are a panel that scrutinise after the event. So I'd sort of reiterate that as well, that I'm not going to say it should be the next meeting. I think that's based on what the force get back as the academic research, and then they make the decisions about what they're going to do with that data, that information. If we can do that, please.
Would you like to see this on the forward work plan, Ian?
I think it's the right way of doing it. It's our process of how we account for what we're scrutinising in the future, and ensures that it stays actually in our meeting memory, as it were, and doesn't just suddenly get forgotten. Yeah.
Okay. So, Mark, if I could ask you to put that on the forward work plan for us to discuss post meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair.
Number of requests to speak. Bobby, you want to say something?
Only, it's not my question, sorry, but just from what Ian has said, actually, I was going to propose that we make a change to the recommendation, which says that we note the report. And I was going to actually request that we recommend for it to come back to panel, maybe in 6 months' time for an update.
That is the way that I was already thinking, but thanks for putting that on the record. Appreciate that. I'm going to move on if you've finished, Ian. You have. May.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank Simon and Martin for what I think is a really very good report. Not a satisfactory report because of the content, but nonetheless a report I think was very, very good. So I have a couple of questions. And the first one, and this is probably me trying to be absolutely clear in my head, when a search becomes a statistic. So is every search that happens recorded as a statistic? That's one question. And then part B to that question is, in terms of recording the search statistics, is it logged on a unique basis? So i.e., if it's the same person and that person happens to pop up in 5 or 6 different locations, and then at each location the person is searched, does that count as 6 or does that count as 1 because it's the same person? And then the other thing that I was actually going on to say, and I think the question has already been answered by Martin, which was, I know you're not in a position to be able to share the report with the recommendations because it is owned by the Chief Constable, but whether there was any difference in operational practices in terms of what the reasons that Dorset Police actually used to stop someone and search them compared to, say, another area where they're closer to the national average with the statistics. And I think the answer, reading in between the lines, is possibly yes, there is, but obviously not knowing what is on that list of recommendations. I just wanted a bit of clarification on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, May. It might be easier if I bring Steve in to answer the detail that you've just asked. But before you do, the first thing that became apparent when I asked for an independent review is you can only work on the statistics that you're given, and it was quite apparent when I was a serving police officer, and it's still apparent that officers will stop people and not record it, and that is one of our problems. And then of course you have stop and account and stop and search, which are different functions. Steve, do you want to come in on the 1 in 6 question?
Yeah, so if I just to expand on the first part to it, because I think there's a number of different bits in there. So just for absolute clarity in regard to a search then, every single time somebody is stopped and searched in law, there is a requirement to make a record for that, to offer it to the individual and go through a number of different processes that have to then get recorded. If it was one person stopped 6 times, that would demonstrate as 6 different searches, whether it was on the same day or over multiple different days.
But if I can just come back on that, Steve, it's quite apparent from what was found by Nick in his review, and quite apparent from my own experience as a police officer, that some people who are stopped and accounted are not recorded.
Yeah, so the requirement for stop and account, which would be simply a stop just to say what are you doing in this area, but not actually leading into a search. The requirement to record that isn't there in the same way that it is for a search. So when you actually go and search for a person and go through the actual legal part within the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, that is a different requirement to record on it. So yeah, absolutely, as the Commissioner says, two very separate things and different in regard to recording. But I think the question initially around if there was 6 searches, for example, on the same individual, then that would be recorded 6 times.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. May, do you have any further questions?
Yeah, just a comment really to say if it's the same individual search 6 times, it's logged as 6 searches or 10 searches or whatever, then whether when I think it would be the stop and search panel, when they were doing their work, whether they had actually asked that question and whether it was possible to actually break that data down to show that actually it was a much lower number of unique searches, because obviously, and I don't want to typecast anybody, but I know certainly in Poole, the statistics of burglary tends to go down when some known individuals are actually either out of the area or for whatever reason they've actually been put in prison for a short period of time. The statistics do go down, and I'm just wondering whether it's possible to share whether that might be the issue, that there's a person that repeatedly is being searched.
So should I answer that?
Yeah.
So we do have access to that data. So DORMIS, which is the Dorset Police Management Information System, contains that information, and that information is presented at an inspectorate level. So to our neighbourhood inspectors, they're able to see all the stop searches that are happening in their area, and they are furnished with a performance report which demonstrates the numbers of stops and the numbers of individuals who've been stopped, the number of times those individuals have been stopped, and also by what officer. We also have data around the numbers of stops undertaken by individual officers to see if individual officers are undertaking high levels of stops. So all that data is available. That's routine management information for Dorset Police, and that is scrutinised through its own management systems by the neighbourhood inspectors and neighbourhood sergeants. I don't believe that is it might have an influencing factor, but I don't believe it's the underlying cause, because we have had access to that data for quite some time.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, May. Les.
Thank you, Chair. Simon, a really good report, thank you. And I think we'll leave it to the PCC to scrutinise the figures when they come back. My only question is, Commissioner, is this a particular area of the force that is leading to concern, or is it across the whole of Dorset?
Sorry, let's say that again. Are you saying is this specific to in one area?
Is this section based?
No, well, Simon's the expert on this bit, but I don't think it is. I think it's across the whole of Dorset. Simon?
Broadly speaking, is a Dorset-wide issue, but there are. I don't want to get into the detail, but so there are some interesting section findings. Let's put it that way. Which are being addressed. So there are some. So what we actually have, we have the level of disproportionality across the county. We have the level of disproportionality within each neighbourhood inspectorate as part of that performance reporting that I mentioned. So it is possible to say, for example, in a particular location, the level of stop search disproportionality is this. So that does prop up some interesting findings from time to time. But obviously that's very tactical data, so that will be a couple of weeks in a very small location. And it's just, you know, from our perspective as the OPCC, we've got to think about this strategically and think about the whole picture. And so obviously we're talking about systems, processes, policies, those kinds of things. And so that's at the level at which we're operating. But the tactical group that sits underneath the stop and search board or the disproportionality board that we've mentioned, that actually is looking at exactly the kinds of issues that you raised, Councillor Fry.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Les. George.
Thank you. Nothing to add that hasn't already been said.
Thank you. Peter. Barrow.
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Bobby.
Yes, please, if I may. Chief Executive made reference to the terms of reference, and I wonder within those terms of reference whether there was a time frame for this piece of work, any targets. I know it was mentioned we don't want to be top anymore, but surely we've got more ambitious targets than that. And what does success look like? If we haven't got those already, could we then ask those to come back in 6 months' time?
I think, Councillor Duff, I think you raise a really interesting challenge. And I think from our perspective, there's a few things to say. So the first point is that the context is that Dorset Police has been the highest disproportional force for 15 years, as well as I've mentioned, and also by far. So a reduction of from 25 to 1 to 22 to 1 to 18 to 1 to 16 to 1 isn't actually going to change our rank. So the point here, I think, is that we need to understand what's driving that, and then move towards actually what our outcomes are going to be on the back of that. So, for example's sake, the last board, there was a conversation about, and it's not something that we really focus on. There was a conversation about targets and quotas. So, for example's sake, we could, a force could choose to actively reduce the level of stop search disproportionality by stopping and searching more white people. That could be the outcome. The outcome could be that we just stop searching black individuals in the same numbers that we're searching. And that would actually lead to a reduction in our disproportionality. My issue and my concern is that we need to understand why we're doing the things that we're doing and understand the results we're getting. And actually, if, for example's sake, the outcome of all the academic research and we go through everything, we find that actually there are really good reasons why Dorset Police is stopping a high level of black individuals compared to a low level of white individuals. If the evidence shows that that is the right thing to do, then that is the right thing to do. And so I think from our perspective, absolutely, we do need to reduce disproportionality, and we're all fully committed to that. You heard that from the Chief Constable, you heard that from the Chief Superintendent as well. But I just caution about metrics and about targets. I think at the moment, I would obviously like to see a reduction in disproportionality, but I don't know what I should be asking for as yet, because I don't know what's driving them. So I think we think from our perspective, I think we just need a little bit more information before we move towards saying to the force, well, what do you think an acceptable target of reduction is? Does that make sense? I hope I'm not avoiding the question.
That was my last question, was what does success look like? Because it isn't always about numbers. And so for us to scrutinise you, we need to know what you're aiming for and to make sure that you're on track, etc. And if you don't have that yet, because it's still early days and the data hasn't come back, etc., that's why I said I'm happy to perhaps review it when it's more appropriate. But equally, we can't take our eye off that ball.
No, and to be honest and upfront and transparent, I think for OPCC and the Commissioner in the first instance, an explanation why are we doing the things that we're doing? If we get an answer to that, that will take us a good way forward, because that's the challenge to the Police and Crime Commissioner. That's the challenge to the Chief Constable, and has been for quite some time. So if we can get an answer to that, that will definitely take us further along where we need to be.
Thank you.
Bobby, do you have any further points you'd like to make?
Not at this moment, other than obviously I would like to put that recommendation to the panel, if you don't mind.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. I would recommend that we note the paper, but also add an amendment, which is to recommend that the paper comes back to the panel in 6 months' time with an update and for us to scrutinise, really see where we are.
Thank you very much for that, Bobby. And may I thank both the OPCC and you especially, Simon, for the excellent work you put in on this paper. It clearly demonstrates that the PCC and the OPCC have worked extremely hard in order to resolve this issue that's that you've identified within the police. I don't have any further points on that, other than that I would like to distance the panel from the statement or the comments made by Councillor Pipe earlier on. I'm not going to say any more than that, other than the panel totally agrees with the view of Councillor Dove. So I am now going to move on to item 10, complaints verbal update.
Chair, sorry, can I just interrupt? I think probably we just need to ratify that recommendation as a change to the recommendation. If we're able to just get somebody to first of all propose that and to second it.
I'll propose it.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to item 10.
Yeah, complaint subcommittee met on the 9th of September. The terms of reference, as we previously agreed, are going to get reviewed annually, which was done, and they effectively remain unaltered. It was agreed, though, that the host authority, Dorset Council's protocol for managing unreasonable behaviour would be adopted to determine how vexatious and other behavioural issues would be managed. The protocol will be updated to include an email address for complainants as well. And in that meeting, there was one exempt business case to review the handling of a complaint that I touched on last meeting. The subcommittee agreed with the decision reached by the monitoring officer for the OPCC and the work done by Dorset Council as well on our service manager for assurance. The complaint's been written to and advised that if he is still unhappy, he can write to the Ombudsman as per our policy and legislation, and that complaint is now closed. There are now currently no outstanding complaints in relation to the PCC.
Okay, thank you very
That's
much.
it, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Moving swiftly on to the forward work plan, Mark.
So the work plan sets out quite a number of areas of focus that have been identified by the panel. Some have been scheduled, others haven't yet been allocated a meeting date and are kept there in the background that will be integrated in over time. I think there's recognition that over time we need to remain pretty flexible with that work plan and keep it under informal review. I'm not going to go into any great detail. I'm conscious of the time. I'm also conscious we've added a few additional items as a result of some of the discussions today, which I'll build into the forward plan. In terms of what's coming up next, we've got an informal training session for panel members, which is scheduled for the 19th of November, and then the next full meeting of this panel on the 10th of December 2020. So that's my update. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Mark. And I also understand that we'll be staying on this virtual means, probably until at least March next year. Is that correct?
I think that's quite likely, I think, Chair, yes.
Yeah, okay. We will obviously manoeuvre around whatever the policy is within Dorset Council as far as this panel is concerned. Were there any urgent items?
No, Chair, nothing submitted as urgent.
And again, item 13, exempt business?
And no exempt business.
Right, so before I close this meeting, is there anybody within the police and crime panel who wishes to make a statement or ask questions before we close this meeting down? Like this is sort of any other business type movement. If you just put your camera on if you wish to speak. Now I can see. No, thank you very much. Martin, would you like to possibly sum up at all?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to sum up that I think it's been a useful meeting, and I thank the panel, as always, for its scrutiny and support. Both are very important, and I thank them for that.
Thank you very much. Well, unless anybody's got anything else they want to say, and I'm looking at, there's no cameras come up, so I can assume that nobody wishes to speak. Before we close this meeting down, may I ask Bobby if you could stay online, please. Mark, if you stay online, please. And we'll take it from there. Thank you very much. Thanks for this meeting.